meeting. The first thing I have to do is to tell you about the fire evacuation procedures, which are here. There are no fire alarms scheduled for this evening. Therefore, if the fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the building immediately. The fire exits are located at the rear and the side of this room, and so please go down the stairs and meet in the Wall Memorial Park and don't run. Thank you. For the benefit of members of the public attending, I'd like to explain who everybody is around this table. I'm Councillor Donald Sherlock, and I'm the Vice Chairman of this committee, but I've stepped up to Chairman for this evening. Down the sides of the table, to the left and to the right, are councillors who sit on this committee and who will be making the decision on the applications this evening. Immediately to my left and right are the officers who will be advising councillors. Along the back, under the windows, are those councillors who are not on the committee, but have asked to present their views, as well as additional officers who may be called on to help councillors. In addition, I would like to explain that the Development Control Committee is a regulatory committee and not a political meeting. The committee will be looking at the evidence brought before us tonight and will make a decision based on planning reasons. We are guided by national and local planning guidance and policy. I understand that planning can be emotive, and I ask that everyone remains polite and professional throughout the evening. May I ask all the speakers, including visiting members, to speak clearly and to return to their seats once their presentation is complete. No further dialogue between members of the committee and speakers will be permitted once questioning has finished. May I ask all committee members to avoid repetition and ask members to keep any comments on each item to a maximum of 4 minutes. Thank you. Next, I should tell you that this meeting is being webcast, and so you will appear. Is it working? Oh, good. Now I move on to item 3 on the agenda, to receive apologies for absence. I have apologies from Councillor Mitchell and Councillor Leeks. And I would like to propose a Vice Chairman and propose Councillor Paul Miller. Do I have agreement to that? Agreed, thank you. Right. Next we go on to, that's resignations and replacements. Next we go on to declarations of interest. I have none unless anybody has got a declaration of interest to make. No? Good. Urgent items and announcements. I've none, but there will be a statement from Mike Townsend here about Marnell Park and other subjects later on, under paper C. Next, I should like to confirm the minutes as printed in the paper A. Agreed. Thank you. Referrals from other committees or the Council, I have none. Issues referred by the Cabinet, I have none. We then move on to paper B. Paper B, item 1, and I have various speakers for this. Yeah, right, okay. Thank you. So 1 and 2 are on the same subject, and we're going to take item 2 first. And we've got speakers in the form of... Right, okay. Are the committee happy with taking 2 first? Thank you. We have speakers in the form of Mr. Dick for the Parish Council, objectors in the form of Major Carroll, and in support, David Morris, and the Ward Councillor, Councillor Sanders, is going to speak as well. Can I ask Mr. Dick, Major Carroll, and Mr. Morris to come up to the front row to be ready to speak? And I will ask the officer to make the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This is an application at Harwood Paddock, and it's an application for an outline for 49 units, residential units. The application is an outline for means of access only to be considered at this stage. This application also includes the transfer of 0.243 hectares of land to the community for a mixture of D1 and D2 uses. The application proposes a density of residential development of 22 dwellings per hectare. The application is recommended for approval by officers, subject to a number of conditions which are set out in the main order paper and subject to completion of a legal agreement. Members turn to the update paper. You'll see that there's been some further letters of correspondence received since the original report went to committee. We've had a letter provided by the applicant to all members of the committee. There's been a letter today circulated by Eastwood Hay Parish Council to the members, and a further letter of objection was received from a local resident. I understand that the viewing panel members queried the density of the Harwood Court development, which is adjacent to the site at Linden Homes. That site has a density of 26 dwellings per hectare, whereas this application proposes a density of 22 dwellings per hectare. Whilst numerically the Harwood Court development is comparable to other developments in Wootton Hill, officers consider that it's the size of the dwellings on that scheme and the size of the plots and the amount of hard standing which create the cramped feel of that particular development. And you'll see for the reasons set out in this committee report that officers consider that this would be a more compatible development with the character of Wootton Hill, and for that reason are recommending approval. Thank you.
Thank you very much. First speaker is Mr. Dick, please, from the Parish Council. Thank you. You have 4 minutes, and I'll give you a warning when you've got 1 to go.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, members of the committee. My name is Graham Dick. I'm chair of the Eastwood Hay Parish Council Planning Committee. The planning officer has directed that in this case, paragraph 14 of the MPPF applies, by which a presumption in favour of sustainable development balances the adverse impacts of that development against any perceived wider benefits. Eastwood Hay Parish Council disagrees with the optimistic assertions made by the applicant and contends that this application fails to demonstrate such a positive balance of benefit to the local community. I wish to highlight, if I may, 3 pertinent issues in relation to this view. First, the relative size of the proposal. This application constitutes a major 49 homes development which falls outside the existing settlement policy boundary for Wootton Hill, but inside an area of outstanding natural beauty. It is excluded from borough development need from both the existing development plan and from the draft local plan, on which consultation concludes in only 2 days' time. It is not envisioned as necessary in the neighbourhood plan currently in development, nor by the large majority of residents in the creation of the 2007 village plan, since the creation of which much of the then identified housing need has already been built. Even this proposed reduced development is disproportionate to the size and semi-rural location of Wootton Hill. It may represent just 1.2% of the 5-year borough housing land requirement, but it also represents a disproportionate increase of over 6% to the population of Wootton Hill. We are not a suburban township, but a rural community of limited resource, substantially removed from the designated areas of predicted population growth. These 49 dwellings would contribute a highly disproportionate near 6.6% of the target annual housing provision for the borough for a year, from a community which represents only 2.5% of your borough's population. In short, there is no demonstrable local need for anything of this size, especially with the new development of Sandalford Park Estate constituting an additional 2,000 homes less than 5 miles away. Second, the local sustainability. The core principles of the NPPF focus on sustainability and the fullest possible use of public transport, walking and cycling. EWPC, supported by comments in your officers' reports, contends that the proposal fails to constitute the economic, social and environmental sustainable development required. Indeed, your highway officers' report concludes that any development within the village would be largely dependent upon a private motor vehicle, hence why the site is considered unsustainable. Additional traffic movements on congested, narrow country lanes with single-file traffic choke points at the closely adjoining junior and primary schools, as well as daycare facilities, as well as the treacherous A343 junction, will not be alleviated by S106 enhancements in the vicinity of the site itself.
Less than a minute.
EWPC believes the proposals do not provide local sustainability. The only sustainable, accessible location of significant local employment is Newbury. The new residents will have to compete for work in Newbury on adverse terms with the massive new labour force available from the nearby 2,000 home Sandalford development. Ladies and gentlemen, this application was not formed out of the wishes of the local community. Quite the contrary. Reference is made to this proposal being as a result of public consultation and feedback, but I would draw the committee's attention to the fact that whilst options were considered for use of spare land, if made available, the overwhelming primary community response was that the open green field be left alone and that the proposed housing development should not take place. EWPC contends that the proposal represents therefore an unwarranted heavy burden on its parish and therefore urges the Development Control Committee to reject the application. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Dick. Are there any questions for Mr. Dick from members? Councillor Potter.
Oh, sorry, I've got to turn that off.
Hello, Mr. Dick. Can I just be absolutely clear? I mean, certainly in the notes we have as a committee, it's indicated that this compromise application, the 49 unit scheme, together with the allocation of community land, is a product of public engagement on the proposals at pre-application stage. I mean, quite frankly, indicating that there's been substantial discussions between the parties, and this is by reaching that agreement that this application is before us. Is that right?
Sorry, that would not be the parish council's view. We did, of course, discuss with the applicant what outcomes they might be able to offer, but at no time has the parish council said that is our preferred option. Sorry.
Councillor Bound.
You talked about the detriment that the scheme would bring about didn't match the benefits. Can you see any benefits from the scheme?
As it stands at this moment, compared to what we have now, we do not see any additional economic benefit coming out of this application. We see significant detriment. We have an already very congested highway system. If any of you actually attended the site meeting, you may probably have done it during a time when the schools were neither dropping off nor collecting. If you were to picture that road with cars parked down one side of it and children trying to cross it through two schools and a nursery, with trucks trying to deliver down there as well, an additional 49 or worse car movements along the only artery in and out of Wilton Hill is virtually unforeseeable.
Well, you didn't really answer my question about benefits. I mean, there is a bus route close to. There will be a footpath put in, as I understand it, and there will be a certain amount of affordable housing.
Okay, the bus route will deliver people for employment into Newbury alone. It is, by the Highways Officer's own report, it's incapable of delivering into anywhere other than Newbury. It does so on a very, very limited basis. Yes, there is a bus route, but it's limited. If you look at the Wilton Hill overall occupation, it is a car-dependent society, and the roads are already virtually choked with it.
Any other questions, members? Right. Thank you, Mr. Dick. Major Carroll, can I ask you to come forward? You have 4 minutes, and I'll give you a warning after when you've got 1 left.
So, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. My name is Major Nick Carell. I'm a serving Army officer and a resident of Walton Hill. I've been asked here this evening by residents of Walton Hill, a fairly substantial number of them, to augment the comments of the parish council and to add the views of the people of Walton Hill to what is, to us, a very important decision. And although I note the chairman's comments that political comments can't be made, this isn't a political address that I'm giving, but it addresses the political space, which is, of course, the will of the local people to determine those actions which directly and manifestly affect them. And this development will have a profound and significant, and I believe, negative effect on the people of Walton Hill, and that's really the point that I'd like to make. Previous applications in and around the village have been refused on the grounds of inadequate local resources, and that's the view of your own planning officers. I would ask what has changed in relation to this particular development. You've already talked about some of the public consultation that's taken place, and high-profile and expensive consultants will tell you that there has been supportive local comment on this. These are technical arguments, and they're not borne out, let me assure you, by the real views of local people based on real local knowledge. We've spoken about traffic, and I think that's particularly germane. I'm the deputy chair of the local school governors. On Friday, entirely unrelated to this, the head teacher sent out a letter pleading for safety on the road that Mr. Dick has just referred to because of the sheer volume of traffic and the danger that that poses to children. Let me assure you that more cars, more families and more movements down that road will only make this situation worse. And there are no plans in the planning game to address this particular problem whatsoever. Consultation, as you will have been told, has taken place. It took place in East Woody, a village some distance away from Walton Hill, and it was an unbalanced survey in that it asked if they prefer apples or oranges, but didn't give respondents the chance to say that they didn't want any development whatsoever. The parish council has conducted its own survey that you will have seen. 97% of people surveyed in the parish council survey were against development, and 83% of them against development at Harwood Paddock. 94% of the letters that you've received are against development. But let me point out, in answer to your question, sir, that the people of the village are not against affordable housing development. They're simply against this development because it is fundamentally not balanced. It's a development for the affluent, and the staggering size of the Section 106 agreement and proposed planning game bears that out. It's not really something that will be directly beneficial to us, and even the offer to move the doctor's surgery is, let me assure you, unwelcome in the view of the people who actually work in the doctor's surgery, who see no need to move that surgery. And the land which we're promised has no assigned role for the people of the village. 2,000 homes in Newbury have been mentioned, and I'd ask you to make a decision that respects local geography, the local geography of where we live in Walton Hill and its proximity to Newbury, regardless of which county it sits in. And look at the local reality rather than expedient political boundaries, which I entirely accept that you face in determining where to place development within your own local plan. On that note,
One
yes,
minute to go.
Registered. The allocation of land to meet Basingstoke's need, due to the lack of a land bank, may be a very good and sound decision, a technical decision, but it doesn't reflect the needs of the local people. And as Mr. Dick has referred to, this application is being rushed through days before a new local plan very probably excludes this site for development. I'd therefore ask you to consider the local argument once again on this. We entirely accept the need for responsible, balanced and needed development for all of the local people in and around Walton Hill, and this very much is the intent of the new consultative local plan and new policies. But it doesn't reflect sound local governance from our own perspective. We see it as an unjustified and disproportionate development for the village in terms of its scale, impact, location and in terms of its need. And I urge you, therefore, very strongly on behalf of the people of the village to reject it. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Major Carell, and I'm sorry I mispronounced your name.
Everybody does, sir.
Members, have you got any questions for the Major? No?
Yes.
Oh, yes, sorry.
It may not be very relevant, but in your view, what do you think would be the best use of the site if you don't develop it? Thank you.
That genuinely is a difficult question. The site, regardless from the technical survey that's taken place, if you go and have a look at it, it's got wetlands flora. It's wet and it's boggy. It would make a great piece of recreational land, but it's quite concave. I genuinely don't know what could be done with it. I think it's probably best left to be agricultural, arable, potentially even a nature reserve, but certainly it's not suitable for development. Beyond that, it's difficult to say, I'm afraid.
So who would be the present owners then, and what is their view? They obviously want to develop it, and that's it, is it?
I'm afraid I haven't spoken to the present owners. Obviously, they're effectively represented here this evening, and quite naturally, they wish to see it developed in the most economically advantageous way possible to them. But that isn't in the most advantageous way for the benefit of the people of the village.
Councillor Eyre.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, Major Correll. My apologies, I wasn't able to attend the viewing panel last week, so I'm at a slight disadvantage. And I'm wondering whether you can help me out, sir. You've stated in your presentation that the people of the village, who know the village far better than any of us, are not against affordable housing per se. And you just indicated that this particular plot of land is potentially unsuitable in the opinion of the residents for any such building at all. Is there anywhere else within the village that affordable housing, in the view of the residents of the village, could in fact be built?
If I can slightly qualify what I'm about to say, I think I don't know, because I'm just a resident of the village. I'm not a member of the parish council. I don't know what other land is available for development. But I make my point about affordable housing because the people of the village very much want to make the point that this isn't, to be frank, a NIMBY argument. It is. We entirely accept the driving social need for socially responsible development that gives housing to the people who need it. And there are a lot of young people with families who are priced out of the housing market in and around where we live. And that's the kind of development that we'd like to see. As to where it falls, I'm afraid I don't come with an alternative suggestion because I'm not a local landowner, but it's certainly not something that the people of the village are against, and that's borne out by the parish council survey.
Any others? Thank you, Major Correll. Mr. Morris, you also have 4 minutes, and I'll give you a shout at one. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening to all. My name is David Morris, and I'm Planning Director for Catesby Clare Land LLP, the applicant. This proposal is recommended for approval by your officers following detailed consideration of the planning balance. When we sat down with the Parish Council and ward member in April of this year, we presented a policy compliance scheme for 70 dwellings. This has been revised to 67 and is also recommended for approval by your officers. We were told by the Parish Council that whilst they were not opposed to the principle of development on the site, only a scheme which incorporated the needs of the community would be acceptable. We have subsequently met the ward member on a number of occasions who has consistently steered us towards a lower density scheme which included land for community uses. We considered the comments, spoke to the landowner and listened. What is before you today, therefore, is a very low density scheme which includes land to be transferred to the community at no cost. The number of dwellings has been reduced from 70 to 49, which represents a 30% reduction. The density has been reduced from 26 to 20 dwellings per hectare, as calculated by the Council's Urban Design Officer. We were also asked to review the parish plan. The plan is a comprehensive survey of the parish, and we understand that a large proportion of the 2,000 people in the parish responded to the questionnaire. 38% of the respondents to the parish plan felt that Woolton Hill could accommodate up to 50 additional houses, and 51% stated that land for allotments should be provided. Turning to the draft local plan, it is clear in paragraph 7 of the Secretary of State's approval of the Marnell Park development that he has considered the draft plan published in August and concluded that it cannot carry any weight in the decision-making process at this time. He also agrees that there is a serious and significant shortfall of land for housing in the borough. Paragraph 9.5.6 of the Marnell Park Inspector's Report states that waiting for the local plan to be adopted and then making up the housing provision later in the plan period would be the antithesis of the approach advocated in the NPPF. Notwithstanding this, we have considered the draft local plan and the previous cabinet reports and sought to ensure that this scheme before you today complies with those policies. In turn, the SLA considers the site is suitable for development. Unfortunately, the North Wessex Downs Planning Officer has clearly not read the draft Basingstoke plan and hasn't appreciated that the council has already allocated development within the AONB in Whitchurch for 150 dwellings. However, he does agree with your officers and our professional experts that development of the site will not have an adverse impact on the landscape of the AONB. In summary, the proposals will also provide land for community use of just over half an acre, which is over twice as large as the existing doctor's surgery site. This transfer is accompanied by payment of £88,000 towards community facilities in the local area and a further contribution of £9,000 towards allotments. The development will provide 40% affordable housing via on-site and off-site means. The Section 106 agreement between the parties has been agreed. Over £840,000 will be paid towards increasing local education capacity, improving transport infrastructure and increasing affordable housing.
1 minute to go.
I would ask the committee today to take this opportunity to grant consent and keep control of the future of the site. The draft local plan, site allocations development document and the neighbourhood plan for the parish will all be decided and approved by an inspector in due course. We have seen what happens when an inspector grants consent for development in Woolton Hill. The inspector on the Linden scheme found that Woolton Hill to be a sustainable location for development where children can walk to school and a density of 26 dwellings per hectare to be acceptable. That density, if applied to this site, would equate to 70 units on the site, not the 49 dwellings before you today. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Morris. Members, any questions for Mr. Morris? Councillor Tucker.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you very much. Just one quickie. When we went on site, I was quite surprised how wet the ground was. Bearing in mind it hasn't been raining that much recently. I wonder how you're going to cope with that if you do get permission.
Thames Water and the Environment Agency have obviously been consulted on the proposals. As highlighted on the site visit, we were hoping to actually open up the culvert there, but we won't be able to do that, unfortunately. Water will now be stored on site in sustainable urban drainage ponds, and the release of water will be controlled. At the moment, the land is used as a paddock. Water is not controlled, and clearly that's why water collects in the bottom of the site, because there is no control over drainage on the site at present.
Councillor Potter.
Thank you. Hello, Mr. Morris. When we visited the site, I certainly wasn't impressed subjectively with the Harwood Court development next door, I have to say. Is the figure that we've been quoted in respect of the application for 49 outline at 22 per acre, that's the figure that you would quote to us, is it?
Well, it's in Sorry about that. It's in the response from John Dawson from the urban design team to the application. In it, he considers that a housing alone density of approximately 22 dwellings per hectare is equivalent to a net PPS3 density of around 20 dwellings per hectare. So it depends how you calculate using open space on site. So 22 is correct, but using the formula that John has applied, it could be argued to be 20 dwellings per hectare.
The other point, if I may, in terms of the allocation of the 0.6 acres of land for community use, did your discussions with the parish council and I guess ward member actually develop in terms of what that actual community use would be? Did you go as far as that, or is this just a broad defined allocation?
Yes. When we met the parish council on the 26th of April in particular, they raised concerns with regard to the provision of the existing doctor's surgery, and in particular car parking around that site, and asked us to consider whether or not land for such a facility could be made available as part of this application. Hence why we went to considerable expense to obviously prepare two applications for the site. On Monday night at the parish council meeting, it was minuted that the council have had discussions with officers of the of Basingstoke Council with regard to seeking land for allotments in the parish. Allotments are a popular request in the parish plan, and the parish council noted that because there wasn't a suitable site for allotments in the village, they wouldn't be able to take that any further. That was also made apparent to us, not just by the parish council, but also by residents living immediately adjacent to the site and others that responded to our consultation.
Councillor Miller.
You mentioned in your presentation, and I asked the question, not having been able to attend the meeting on Friday, the viewing panel, that the previous inspector's report said that the site was sustainable and included, as I understand your presentation, that it was located, the other application, in a position where children could quite safely walk to school. That's not relevant to what we are looking for tonight, because we're adding another 47 houses into the village. And we've heard the parish council say that the roads around that particular site, the one we're referring to tonight, are particularly narrow and congested with traffic. It doesn't seem to gel, what we've heard from the parish council and your reference to a previous site. How would you as an applicant see the transportation of children to the schools from this new site? Would it be in congested roads in a safe manner? This goes to sustainability.
We've been made aware that the part of the problem in relation to the traffic congestion outside the school is the fact that the vast majority of children obviously are dropped off at the school by their parents in the cars. We've been made aware by people who have written to us and to the council that some of the children are travelling 5 to 10 miles to the school in the car. What we have here obviously is an opportunity to make sure that development in the village ensures that through the provision of a footpath linking the scheme to other footpaths in the village, that children can have an opportunity to walk to work. And if there are more children, and Hampshire County Council's response to the Section 106 negotiation specifically talks about the reassignment of catchments. I believe they are aware that this school, the two schools, serve a large catchment area, and they would therefore look to reappraise that, which would intrinsically result in less people having to drive to the school.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Morris. Councillor Sanders. You have 4 minutes and I'll tell you one.
Good evening, councillors. This is just very clearly an opportunist application based upon the fact that the borough does not have an adequate land supply. This is a site which has previously been rejected on a number of occasions. It cuts across any form of local involvement in its planning, even though the village has begun to do its own neighbourhood plan. It's had no chance to complete that process. And it cuts across the principle of protection of the AONB, that there should not be major developments in the AONB unless there are exceptional circumstances. And there are no exceptional circumstances. Let me deal with the land supply question. The local plan is almost finished. It's comes out of consultation this week. That local plan, assuming it goes forward, will adequately deal with the question of land supply. And even if it doesn't, there was a list of other sites eminently more suitable than this one for alternative development. But we're told it cannot be taken into consideration. Well, I would just like to query that, because the judicial review, of which we're all very familiar, stated that there should never be very high Chinese walls between the planning and the landowning sides of the council. And we all, as councillors, know that we have agreed and voted for many down to be developed, and that is proceeding going forward. Therefore, we know that there will be housing within the next 5 years, which will more than adequately make up for this amount of shortfall of housing, were there to be any. Therefore, I would ask you to consider whether or not this argument is actually sustainable, that there isn't an adequate five-year land supply. But putting that to one side, what is more fundamentally worrying about this is that this application has got nothing to do with what local people want. It's got nothing to do with the good of the community. It's got nothing to do with protecting the environment in which this village sits in the AONB. Even the developers, by bringing forward alternative sites, have actually accepted that one of the applications they're putting forward tonight isn't really very good, and there's a better one that they're asking you to look at. This site was declared unsustainable by the inspector looking at our local plan in 1995. It was declared unsustainable by another inspector in 2005 looking at it, on the grounds of limited local services. Since 2005, bus routes have been curtailed, the schools are now full, and it's all very well to talk about Section 106 agreements to allocate extra space in the schools. How do you build extra space in a school which hasn't got any space on which to build? And it's all very well talking about changing catchment areas. Where are these other schools that they're supposed to go to? It doesn't hang together. Equally, nobody's mentioned tonight the sewage. Every now and then we get an outpouring of sewage in the village because the sewage system cannot cope. There is no indication how this sewage system is going to cope. And by the way, where are the conditions, if this were to be accepted, which would contain them? They were requested by Thames Water. The site is still unsustainable. The development is not wanted, it's not needed, it's not practical, but we could be landed with that all because a theoretical loophole because of the 5-year land supply. Do we really want to endorse poor development in the wrong place at the wrong time before the local people have had a chance to determine what they want for the future simply because of a loophole? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any questions for Councillor Sanders? Councillor Potter.
Hello, Councillor Sanders. Welcome back. Some of the things that you recite there, I mean, resonate with me and could have been applied, I think, to a site that I know particularly well, which is Kiln Farm, and we know the result of that. I mean, do you find any contradiction in the arguments you put forward to those that it's fair to say you and your colleagues refused to put forward in respect of Kiln Farm and its inclusion in the draft local plan, in terms of prematurity and opportunistic application, or not?
Without wanting to get into an argument about another site which isn't relevant to this application, I think the difference is that this is a site which actually has been ruled out on a number of occasions as not being sustainable. Is a very small site, but its impact is very significant on a large area of housing around it. For those reasons alone, I think this has to be considered as separate. The argument around Kiln Farm, I think, needs to be dealt with as a separate issue. It's not relevant to this planning application.
Councillor Eyre.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, Councillor Sanders. I wonder whether you could just help me out, because I feel as though I've heard slightly contradictory views from yourself and from Major Carell. You have said, sir, that the villagers do not believe this is needed, it's not wanted. Major Carell, I believe, said to us that the people of the village are not against affordable housing, and indeed young people are being priced out of this particular part of our borough because they cannot afford to live there. Can you just help me out as to which of you is perhaps more accurate as to whether this affordable housing is needed or wanted or not? Thank you.
I think there are figures, certainly in the Parish Council submission, I think maybe in the paper as well, on the current list of numbers of people in housing need in the area, which, if I remember off the top of my head, was, I think, a figure somewhere around about 11, of which, however, half that need has probably just been met by the 6 additional affordable housing units that are on Harwood Court nearby. Therefore, we are down at very, very low levels. Yes, I'm sure there are lots of people who might, want to have houses, but that's not quite the issue. I think the issue we're trying to address. I think my point would be that this site may well, in some point in the future, come back for development, but it should come back for development at a time when, as part of a neighbourhood plan, the neighbourhood plan which is under development at the moment. There clearly is no immediate need for this amount of housing in the village. Let the parish and the people of the parish be the main people to decide that, in exactly the same way as we have given the opportunity, or intend to give the opportunity, to the people of Whitchurch and Overton and Bramley to decide their future development.
Councillor Tupper.
Thank you. The development next door, which is called Harwood Court, we as a planning authority refused it, and it was granted on appeal. Do you believe that that's a similar kind of position that was in then as is now?
The reasons it was put forward for rejection by the officer at the time were exactly the reasons why nobody likes it now, of overcrowding and massing. If ever there was a case that the proof of the pudding has been proved right in the eating of it, he was absolutely right in terms of the design of that site. It's a pity sometimes that inspectors aren't forced to come back and be accountable for what they've delivered on unsuspecting people they'll probably never see again.
Any other questions? Thank you, Councillor Sanders. Right, members. Questions to officers. Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to bring up a point that's just been brought up about Thames Water and the wastewater. Paragraphs in here. Unfortunately, the paragraphs aren't numbered, but it's mentioned on page 70 of 213 in the application. And maybe I missed it, but I looked for conditions and I didn't see any. And I know this is outlined. I know it's to do with the principle of the development and access. But as it's already included in here, can we have an update as to why we don't have conditions? Is this development and the, if we're reminded to approve it, conditional upon Thames Water providing the right kind of information to the local planning authority? And if they didn't, would that be a showstopper for refusal from the planning authority, from the planning officers?
The conditions, you're right, they're not imposed on the report, and I think that is an oversight, and they can be added on should members resolve to approve the application. Thames Water are a statutory undertaker, and they have a legal obligation to support new developments and provide the infrastructure to support new developments, and that doesn't matter where those developments are. And as reported, there's an infrastructure study being undertaken now, and the applicant has identified what is necessary to be able to deal with the sewage and to deal appropriately with the capacity and get it off-site into the network. And Thames Water will have an obligation to carry out the upgrades to the network as necessary to accommodate this development. So yes, we can put a condition on to ensure that happens.
If we put the condition on, where do we get the confidence in Thames Water that they'll be able to achieve this? Because there's a lot of nervousness I heard tonight from the parish council themselves and from, I believe, the ward member, that there is flooding and sewage flooding within the village currently. So very sensitive to this, because this is happening elsewhere around the borough, including within Basingstoke town itself. And I think this is going to appear, this subject is going to appear on many other applications. But this one in the country, when you have sewage problems in the country, it's very, very close to home.
Yeah, as I understand, there is a problem at the moment, and Thames Water, the process that they go through, haven't necessarily over the past few years addressed that problem. But I understand now that there is an impact study being undertaken by Thames Water, and that they are in active dialogue with the applicants over what is necessary. As I understand it, there would be a holding tank placed on site, pumping station, and that would pump to the network at a time when the network isn't in high demand, so in the early hours of the morning, effectively. And that's the scheme that would be put in place. The pumping station shown on the indicative master plan. So yeah, Grampian conditions would be used to secure that. And Thames Water would need to provide that infrastructure.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Bound.
Thank you. Yes, I was wondering, the affordable housing requirements, in the light of what Councillor Sanders said there about the Harwood Court development, would that mean that the developers could then reduce the amount of affordable housing they were putting on this development, or would it just mean that that would be put elsewhere in a rural community?
No, for this scheme, the applicant is proposing our policy requires 40%, or a starting point of 40% of a development to be provided as affordable housing. In this case, the applicant's proposing to provide some affordable housing on site, and that is to meet effectively the balance of what's required within the immediate ward of Wootton Hill, East Woodhay Ward, and then to make an off-site contribution to make up to the balance of the 40%. To meet the wider rural housing need of this borough. So what's being proposed is actually a policy compliant 40% delivery of affordable housing. Some will meet the immediate local need, and then the remainder will meet the wider borough rural housing need.
So does that mean then that, taking into account what's on Harwood Court, that the balance would go elsewhere?
Yes, effectively. So the off-site financial contribution would be put towards with other developments in the vicinity. The Section 106 is being drafted in such a way that it will meet a rural housing need. So ideally we would look at the ward as a whole, so St Marybourne Highclere ward, and potentially it could be a rural exception site that may come forward. It would be delivered in conjunction with a rural housing provider that works closely with the Borough Council, and that money would be pooled with other developments in the area to provide affordable housing to meet that wider need.
So still in effect 40%?
Yeah, a policy compliant 40%.
Councillor Tucker, followed by Councillor Potter.
Thank you. Can I come back to Catherine again, please? With regard to my question to the agent about the drainage of the site, his answer was very similar to yours regarding sewerage. Now, normal drainage and sewerage don't normally go together, and I'm a bit confused as to what we're talking about here. We've got two different kinds of tanks. It doesn't make sense to me, but maybe I'm just being stupid.
There's a pumping station proposed, which would be near the provision of the community land. So pumping station proposed there. That's where the sewage, effectively holding tank, would be in the pumping station. There's attenuation ponds proposed also on the site, and that's part of the sustainable urban drainage. So that deals effectively with the surface water. Yeah, SUD, sustainable urban drainage. So there are attenuation ponds, so the water collects there and it then naturally filters away into the ground. And things like permeable paving would be placed on the site to help deal more effectively with drainage.
Councillor Potter, followed by Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. This is for Catherine as well. If you could just help me a little. It's in regard to the issue of prematurity. I'm looking at the paragraph on page 82 of 213. If I may, I'll quote it, Chairman, only insofar as a number of people may not have the report in front of them. But the paragraph actually talks about the proposed development would have an impact on only a small area of the borough, and is not considered to be so significant that it would prejudice the scale and location of development in the local plan, given that the proposal, and we're now saying this, for up to 49 units would amount to just 1.7% of the 5-year housing land requirement and less than 0.6% of the overall 15-year requirement. Approving this application would not be premature in the officer's view. I wonder if Catherine could just elaborate on that a little, please, in regard to where we now find ourselves or assume ourselves to be in the context of the draft local plan. I'd be grateful for just Catherine's comments on that, if you will.
So, as you're aware, in terms of the local plan process and the MPPF, so the MPPF is quite clear that where a local planning authority doesn't have an up-to-date local plan, then it has to consider developments under paragraph 14 of the MPPF, and that provides those two policies. So first one to consider is whether there's any significant and adverse impacts that demonstrably outweigh the benefits of the scheme, and then the second is whether there's a specific policy in the local plan, specific policy in the framework that indicates development should be restricted. In terms of the local plan, paragraph 216 and 215 and 216 of the MPPF says that you can place weight depending on the degree of preparation of that local plan and the extent to which there's unresolved objections. At this point in time, we're currently out for consultation. We don't have a local plan in place, and we do not know at this point in time the extent of those unresolved objections. There's a process rightly to go through in terms of the local plan and the allocation of sites. Eventually it will go to an inspector, and an inspector will look at it and make a decision in terms of our supply and what we've put forward and whether it's a sound document. And at that point, obviously, there'll be a lot of weight that can be attached to that document. At this point in time, we don't have that document in place, so we can't put a great deal of weight on it. So we're led back to paragraph 14 of the MPPF, and that's the basis for decision. In our view, given what we have as a borough to allocate in terms of the overall land supply and the overall annual requirement of housing, the percentage of housing that this particular application would deliver is low in comparison to what the borough needs as a whole annually and over our 5-year requirement.
Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. There's a question for officers, really, who may take it up. I just note in the relevant planning history, we have currently got planning permission for 16 houses on this site. Am I reading that properly? Yeah. Sorry.
No, that's the Harwood Court scheme. If you look on the plan that's on screen, the white area just to the bottom left, that's the Linden Homes Harwood Court development.
Any other questions? So we'll open it to debate now. Anybody wish to speak? Councillor Bound.
I'll kick off. Somebody's got to do it, I suppose. I have great sympathy here with the parish in that they obviously do not want this development. And there's been a certain amount of consultation with the parish on this matter. But unfortunately, I can't see any real reason to refuse it at the present time, unfortunately. In my opinion, it doesn't affect the area of natural beauty. It's surrounded on 3 sides by housing already, and I don't think the housing that's going to be there will affect the housing, the housing which is proposed to be built will be affected or will affect those around and about. There is a need for some affordable housing in the village which will be satisfied by this development. The sustainability worries me slightly, but there will be a footpath built through the site which will link other footpaths and will certainly take people up along the road that we saw when we did the site visit to the bus stop. There is a route into Newbury, albeit that it's probably not as functional as perhaps it might be or could be in the future. And there will be some, if we approve this one, there is allotment provision, community provision within the site. And I think on the balance of it, the benefits for me outweigh the great sympathy that I've got for the village in this.
Councillor Potter.
I mean, my comments are similar to Councillor Bound's, Chairman. I mean, reminded as we were by you that this is a regulatory committee and we try, and I find it difficult on occasions, you probably know, to deal with matters that relate to planning law only. I can find no planning reasons why we would reject this application. It's as straightforward as that, I think, really. I can elaborate if people want me to, but the simple fact is I don't find any reasons for rejecting it on planning grounds, and therefore I would support this application.
Any others?
If I may, so I'm happy to move that if that helps the process in any way.
Thank you.
Don't
Do I
have
have
a seconder.
Seconder. Thank you. Therefore, do we take a vote on that? Right. Those in favour? Those against? Thank you. The motion is approved. Can you do some conditions for me, please? Thank you.
Chair, so the application's been approved. The conditions would be as per the recommendation, but we would add two conditions, one to deal with surface water drainage and one to deal with foul water as the ramping conditions recommended by Thames Water, and obviously subject to completion of the 106 agreement. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, now we revert to item 1 on the agenda, which is the same site for a different number.
Chair, I'm confused. I mean, the note that we had before us suggests that, having done what we've done, the applicant would be withdrawn if the smaller of the two applications is approved. Is that right? I mean, this is what the update note says to us.
Yes.
Chair, yeah, we have received a letter from the applicant that does say that the application would be withdrawn if the smaller of the two schemes was approved. However, it would only be withdrawn at the point that the council issues the planning permission. So to get to that stage, we need to complete the 106 agreement and issue the permission. So at that point, the applicant would, as it said, indicated that he would withdraw the application. So it is an application that is to be determined. Members may wish to determine the application at this committee, or they may wish to defer for consideration at a latter committee, but that's a decision that members must make.
Councillor Miller?
Having heard the officer there, Chair, I'd like to propose that we defer decision on item number 1, with the caveat that as long as the legal agreement for item number 2 is approved, that can be brought back to committee, and I don't know if we decide it then or just leave it in the hands of the officers that it will be withdrawn by the applicant. I don't know how you want to word it, but that would be my proposal.
Chair, I just think in terms of the decision to defer, it'd be helpful if there was if you like, the planning reason for doing so, because obviously decisions have been made on one application on the merits of that application, and then the next application would normally be considered on its merits as well. So it'd be, it's entirely within the committee's remit to defer. There's no issue there, but it's more in terms of the reasoning for deferral. I think it'd be useful to have.
Councillor Goodison.
Thank you, Chair. I might just like to offer one reason for deferring would be that if we do actually discuss it and refuse it, the applicant could appeal it, whereas presumably if we defer it, he won't have the opportunity to appeal it until he's finally committed to the one that we just passed. Thank you.
Chair, I'm having a problem coming up with a planning reason. That's why I'm looking to my left to the planning officers for some advice on this one. You could turn around and say if this planning application is approved, the other one would be, it would be, how can I put it, perverse to even approach it because you've already got an extant planning application on the same site. I'm not quite sure how you couch that in terms that would satisfy the deferral.
Yeah, I can understand the position being raised. I think the issue is that if the applicant wished to withdraw the application, he could do so now. If he didn't withdraw the application, then there is an application that's been brought to the committee for your consideration. If there's no real reason to defer it at this time, and if it was deferred, equally the applicant would have an opportunity to appeal non-determination potentially anyway. So I'm not sure Councillor Godison's sort of reasoning would necessarily sort of assist in that situation.
Under the circumstances, can we hear from the applicant, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. As stated in the letter sent to the case officer, Catherine Mars, yesterday, we have agreed to withdraw this application subject to the Section 106 agreement being signed and a decision notice being issued for the 49 dwelling scheme. That still stands. The letter is clear and unambiguous in that it is in effect as a resolution to withdraw once that is done. And we are happy that once the agreement is signed by the council, that simultaneously our application here for 67 units is withdrawn. If the committee want a planning reason for deferral, then it may well be to consider the effects, perhaps, of this scheme in isolation or something along those lines, with a view to bringing it back to committee in one cycle.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Morris. We will just confer here.
Can we not defer it at the suggestion of the applicant until they, there is a decision on this one, it's actually signed. I mean, it is the applicant's suggestion. We're not doing anything that's not with his approval, isn't it?
Chair, just considering that point further, I think the only planning reason that I could foresee is that if essentially allowing that extra time for the 106 to be signed and the planning permission be granted would then inform the committee as to whether or not there is an extant permission on the site, and then whether that would then be material to the consideration of the second application. That, I think, would be a reasonable planning matter to consider. But I think members would have to be clear in their minds that that is the reason for the deferral today, and that you feel you cannot consider the other application until that point has been reached.
Members, do we have agreement to that?
Agreed.
Agreed. Thank you. Right. Onward, item number 3.
Thank you, Chair. Item number 3 is an application at the Stone Circle B&V Masonry on the A339 Kingsclear Road in Wootton, St Lawrence. It's an application for a new industrial building, workshop building, to support the existing stonemasonry business. The application includes a change of use of agricultural land to stonemasonry, the erection of the workshop building, additional car parking and storage yard, and amended HGV vehicle access. The application is recommended for approval by officers, subject to the completion of a legal agreement, which is at an advanced stage, and subject to a number of conditions which are set out in the officer's report. Since the publication of the report, we've received a further letter of support from a local resident. Wootton St Lawrence Parish Council have also withdrawn their objection to the application, and the various emails received from the parish are summarised in the update paper. There's also been a suggestion about the roof colour, which is covered in the officer's report. Members will note that condition 5 of the recommendations would require submission of material samples, so it's perfectly possible to agree a colour with the applicant for the roof tile that is different from that shown on the plan. So the recommendation stands for approval as per the update, as per the order paper. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. I have 3 speakers for this, Mr. Wotton and Mr. Van Ensberg, and Councillor Tucker on behalf of Councillor Leake, who can't be present, and he's the ward councillor. So, can I start off with Mr. Watton, please? Are you both speaking? You have 2 minutes between each then, or you can have one has 4 minutes, but no more. 2 minutes it is? Right.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. This application has been a year in its preparation, during which time we've undertaken extensive pre-application advice with the local authority and consultation with the local community. The design and layout of the development has evolved over this period to incorporate the views of council officers and the local community. We are now confident that all concerns raised have been overcome with the current submission presented to you this evening. The application has full support of the local authority and the Monk Sherborne Parish Council. An initial objection from Wootton St Lawrence Parish Council has been withdrawn, and 3 of the council members have since written in support of the application. The local ward members raised concerns over industrial buildings in the countryside and the visual impact on the rural landscape. The MPPF supports the expansion of rural businesses, and it should be noted that this is an expansion of a business on an existing industrial site, not a new industrial site within the countryside. Significant effort has been put into the design of the building to reduce its visual impact. The site is to be excavated, the eaves and ridge of the building have been kept to a minimum, and the building now takes the form of several structures, reducing its ridgeline and scale. These refinements evolved during the consultation with the local authority and have reduced the visual impact of the development. It has been suggested that my client should move to a larger industrial unit within Basingstoke. However, the majority of these sites are publicly owned and can only be rented, an option that is not economically viable.
30 seconds.
The business requires bespoke building and masonry process involves a large throughput of water which has to be recycled. A process must be considered at the design stage of any new building. The cost increase in retrofitting a water recycling system to an existing building would be unviable. It is worth noting that the site has a covenant on it, stating that the site can only be used for stone masonry. This eliminates future use of the site and of occupiers for an alternative use. It is also proposed that this is enforced by way of a condition. The site was granted planning permission in 2009, a permission that has been extended until 2015. The permission included a new workshop.
Yeah, I thought you were both going to speak. You want him to finish?
If I could. Thank you. Sorry, the site was granted permission in 2009 and the permission has been extended until 2015. This permission included for a new workshop and a 7-metre high external crane that would run the length of the yard area. The permission cramped the site and eliminated scope for future expansion. The external crane is considered by many to be an eyesore and out of character with the rural setting. This development replaces a requirement for the crane. This application provides the business with a state-of-the-art premises that will see the expansion of a rural business and provide employment opportunities for many years in the future. This is a positive application promoting economic growth within the borough. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Watton? No? Thank you, Mr. Watton. Councillor Tucker, are you going to speak on behalf of Councillor Leake? Thank you.
Yes, first of all, let me say this is purely for Councillor Leake and not my views at all. First, can it be noted that my wife, and that's Councillor Leake's wife, and sorry, I hate myself, and I have been customers of this business in the early part of 2013. I recognise the quality of the company's products. However, that, in my view, does not invalidate my concerns set out below. Hopefully, members who visited the site last Friday will have seen the magnificent landscape in which the current buildings sit. It lies on high ground from which there are extensive views over the Kennet and Thames valleys, with only limited buildings to be seen. Immediately adjacent to the site is the North Wessex Downs AONB, through which the A339 snakes its way towards Kingsclere. This landscape is as good as it gets, and I question whether we wish to spoil it by allowing a vast steel structure to be erected. The existing buildings were largely former agricultural buildings with a brick-built extension and other modifications. They are modest in scale and reasonably sympathetic to the character and visual quality of the area. The proposed development is entirely different. It is substantially larger in scale and is to be constructed with materials inappropriate to the very rural character of the area. Although the applicant claims the new building will be screened by the existing buildings and the ridge height will not be materially higher than that of the existing buildings, it will nevertheless be a very large steel structure in this beautiful landscape, and I suggest an eyesore. I have advised the applicant that the operations conducted on the site would be more appropriately conducted on an industrial estate in Basingstoke, where there is ample capacity and would have no significant impact on the existing workforce. I am well aware that successful businesses need to be able to expand and grow. Many businesses have been forced to move to achieve that aim. The question members need to consider is the impact of the proposed extension on the landscape. We have recently approved the pre-submission local plan, and in particular policy EM1, landscape impact. It says that, quote, development will be permitted only where it can be demonstrated that the proposals are sympathetic to the character and visual quality of the area. Development proposals must respect, enhance, and not be detrimental to the landscape, end of quote. I suggest to you that approval of this application flies in the face of proposed policy EM1 and less than 2 months after we approve that policy. Members may also be aware that there is a proposal to construct a solar panel thank you, panel farm on the 96-acre field immediately behind the application site. If we give an inch, we will lose miles of wonderful landscape, which is what Basingstoke which makes Basingstoke and Dean such a great place to live. I ask you to refuse the application. Should you be minded to approve, then I do ask that you consider whether the materials and colour schemes are appropriate. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Tucker. Do you want any questions on that? Or questions to officers now? Do I have any? Councillor Gerritsen.
Thank you, Chairman. I presume I'm probably correct in saying that this sort of activity would generate a considerable volume of noise in treating all this stone. I wouldn't have thought that was very appropriate in the middle of an industrial site. Would the officers agree that this possibly is not the sort of activity that should go on in an urbanised or industrial area? Thank you.
There's no nearby residential dwellings in the vicinity of the site, so yes, it's probably an appropriate location for a noise-generating use. But actually, the applicant's noise levels are quite low. Having visited the site, so it's not really an excessive level of noise in this particular instance.
No, I was just wishing to point out that it was a sort of activity which would be better being conducted where it is at the moment rather than moved into an industrial site.
Any other questions to officers? No. Let's move on to debate then. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you. As the ward councillor for an adjacent ward, I thought I'd get in first, simply to say that this is obviously a respected business, and we'd like to see it expand and flourish to the benefit of Basingstoke. It seems that efforts have been made to minimise the visual impact, and in the absence of really any substantial objections, except from Councillor Leake, who seems to be the minority of one, and I don't think we should be considering the solar panel farm, which isn't part of this application. I would trust the officers to make sure that the materials are suitable for the surrounding area, and appreciate that the efforts that have been made to reduce the visual impact as much as possible, and would like to propose, I've forgotten, move it, thank you very much, for approval, thank you.
Those against, just for the sake of it? None. Sorry, conditions.
Okay, yeah, the application's been approved subject to the conditions and the completion of the 106 as set out in the report. Thank you. And the materials, samples to be agreed by officers.
Right. Right, item number 4, 429 Worthing Road, and we have to speak on this Mr. John Pearson and Councillor Taylor. Oh, and we're taking 4 and 5. Can I have agreement with members that we take 4 and 5 together? Agreed, thank you. Yeah, no, what's his name? Mr. Pearson. Yes, indeed, if you'd like to go. Councillor Taylor.
This application is for the erection of a detached two-bedroom dwelling with detached double garage and its associated conservation area consent for the demolition of some of the existing single-storey buildings on the site. If I can draw your attention to the update sheet, you'll see that this is a site that members recently viewed. And what we've picked up from the site visit is that the existing bungalow at 429 Worthing Road, which the application site forms part of their garden, is no longer within the ownership of the applicant, and therefore it is recommended that any decision tonight should be subject to additional neighbour notification of that property, as they wouldn't originally have been neighbour notified. The recommendation is for approval as per the committee report. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Councillor Taylor, you have 4 minutes. Thank you.
Good evening, members, and thank you, Chairman. I'm here as a ward councillor to speak in support of these related planning applications to Basingstoke-Dean. I'm grateful to the committee for their site visit last Friday. This experience will have shown the extent to which Mr. and Mrs. Tipper intend to not just build their new home, but also completely transform a land area that consists of derelict outbuildings, an obsolete outdoor swimming pool, and landscaped grounds. This part of the borough, Worthing Village, has very old roots and has been preserved in a highly desirable state over time. This plot of land has been both their home and the base for Mr. Tipper's landscaping business for over 40 years. However, this business is now defunct and Mr. Tipper is retired, and all that remains of this business are the outbuildings. Their demolition and the restorative landscaping is an intrinsic part of this plan. Mr. and Mrs. Tipper's intentions are clearly to respect and enhance their living area, and in so doing maintain not only the quality of their lifestyle in retirement, but also restore this piece of land to a high standard reflecting this rural setting. As members will be aware, there is a considerable history behind these current applications, which began in July 2012. During this time, Mr. and Mrs. Tipper have lived in a caravan on the site of the proposed development of their two-bedroom bungalow. A number of adjustments and amendments to their plans have been required by Basingstoke-Dean, and they have been fully complied with over this time by Mr. and Mrs. Tipper. In addition, they have fulfilled the requirement to pay for first a BAT survey and then most recently a noise impact assessment. As I understand it, the results of both these tests have been accepted by Basingstoke-Dean. The latter related mostly to the noise from the railway line. In my opinion, it would have been astonishing if their planning application fell for this reason, especially in the context of the current consideration that over 100 houses are built on Worthing Farm site that would stand directly between Mr. and Mrs. Tipper's bungalow and the railway line. With regard to the issue of potential road noise, the proposed bungalow is even further away from Worthing Road than all the other houses in this location, even their former bungalow home next door. Whilst it is clearly a duty of this borough to ensure the protection and appropriate development within these village rural settings, I would suggest that this local authority also has a responsibility to enable quality and fitting development that would be to the greater good of Worthing Village in particular and this borough in general. If the current proposals in the applications, as duly amended and satisfactory bat and noise tests have been conducted, I would respectfully suggest that the character and appearance of the conservation area will be preserved and, given the overall detail of the intended outcome, even enhanced.
1 minute, Councillor.
I fully support Mr and Mrs Tipper's applications, and I would ask that the officer's recommendations for approval are accepted by this committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Do I have any questions for Councillor Taylor? No? Thank you very much. Mr Pearson, would you like to come forward?
Thank you, Mr Chairman and members, for allowing Councillor Taylor to go before me. It gets rid of at least 2/3 of what I was going to say. As you're aware, within your powers as a planning authority, as members, you have to consider the social and economic circumstances of your residents within the borough. And Mr Tipper has been a landscape contractor in this town from 1966, dealing with development group sites and HCC schools, until 2007-8, when Hampshire County Council brought in or started to use what we call an EU framework policy, European Union interfering with Britain yet again. And he lost 75% of his workload within a month because of that policy. And of course that put the strain on the Tipper family, having lived in his property for 40 years, or 25 years in that property and 40 years in the area of Worthing. It could not be afforded any longer to live at 429 Worthing Road. So I was asked to help. As a local developer and landlord, I started to meet the Tippers on a very regular basis to assist with their affairs, but was brought to a standstill by a comment of Mrs Tipper's. Pearson, stop being a developer and secure me an approval to build a small bungalow where I can end my years. Difficult when somebody says that in my industry. We don't normally speak like that in the construction industry. So we brought in our architect and we started in late 2011, and we put various schemes to the planning authorities' officers, and I have today thanked them for what they have presented you with a report, and there's no reason and no question we wish to raise about the report other than one which was highlighted by members visiting Friday last the site. And there was a comment in the report about the site being seen from a public footpath between the site and the railway. A member quite rightly pointed out that cannot be the case because the hedge is 3.5 metre high laurel. So that isn't a question today. And just on one final point, I note on your agenda today that the authority did not have the amended drawing of the blue and red line surrounding it, but the purchaser of 429 Worthing Road actually is supplying to the site water and electric, and are fully aware of the Tippers' problems, and she assists in every way she can. Thank you, members.
Thank you, Mr Pearson. Any questions for Mr Pearson from members? Councillor Tucker.
Mr Pearson, can I ask a cheeky question? What happens to the swimming pool? Does it become a basement?
Possibly a wine cellar, as one member said here. No, I don't think Mrs Tipper would possibly allow that. But certainly we would hope to use some of it as storage. But of course that is controlled by building regulation, really, where we build the structure. I think the swimming pool will go, madam, perhaps with just a little box area to put old history.
Any more questions? Thank you, Mr Pearson. Right, now questions to officers. Do I have Councillor Bound?
Just one. I mean, what's the status of the mobile home on the site if the application is allowed and the place is built? The mobile home, can it stay?
The mobile home was only brought to my attention following the site visit the other day, so it's obviously fairly recently appeared. I mean, it would as it stands, it's an unauthorised structure, and that's something that we can look into as part of our compliance duty. So I would imagine that there wouldn't be enough room on the site anyway. But as it stands, it is an unauthorised structure, so it will be something we'll have to log as we'll have it on our records as part of an enforcement case to keep an eye on that.
Any more? Councillor Taylor.
This is probably a question that was asked at the viewing and I wasn't there, but why exactly has this come to committee? I'm sure it was asked, wasn't it? And it doesn't seem, you know, the ward councillor's happy and nobody is objecting and you want it, so why is it here?
Yeah, it was simply a case in this instance that because it's a, if you like, a slightly new approach, because it's outside an SPB, it would have previously been refused on principal grounds. Because there'd been a similar case, if you recall, 3 or 4 cycles ago, I think, in Etchingswell, where the sort of new approach to sustainability and the approach to isolated dwellings have been considered by members. On this occasion, I felt it was appropriate not to use delegation and effectively bring it to members again to see your views on whether it's an appropriate form of development. Clearly, we as officers feel that it is, taking that new approach endorsed by the MPPF.
Do I have any more questions? No? Right, open to debate. Proposed Councillor Potter.
Well, sorry, Chairman, I mean, Mr Pearson knows me, I guess. I mean, I'll ignore his comments about the EU as a supporter of the EU and move the application for approval.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Tucker. Thank you. Right, those in favour of approval? Thank you. Carried unanimously. Just for the sake of the record, that was both applications. You all agreed to that. Thank you. Conditions? Do we have any?
The recommendation is subject to the signing of a 106 agreement, the further neighbour notification and the conditions as per both the reports.
Thank you. Right, now we move on to item number 6 and 7. I think we take them both together, if I remember rightly. Thank you. Well done. Right. Now, members, items 6 and 7, now we agree that we can take those together too. Thank you. We have 3 speakers. For the parish, Councillor Mr Cox, Mr Haig, and then Mr Florwith. And if you could all prepare yourselves, and officers will give us a preparation. Thank you.
The application concerns the erection of a replacement 5-bedroom dwelling at Red Roses, Cross Lane, Ashmansworth, and for the demolition of the existing property on site. Within the update, members will note that a letter has been received from the applicant and seeking clarification on the use of our interpretation of the SPD on residential amenity design guidance, Appendix 16, and clarification of the permitted development rights of properties. Also, members should note that a further letter of objection has been received from the neighbour to the north, Hallam, and that one letter of objection has been received from the neighbour to the west of the property, raising issues that have already been addressed in the committee report. But members should also note that an additional condition has been recommended to be imposed regarding the protection of the hedge along the northern and the western boundaries. The recommendation is for approval, subject to the conditions on the order paper.
Thank you, Nicola. Can I start off then with Councillor Cox, please? You have 4 minutes, and I will give you a warning of when there's one left.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
I'll start again. I'm Alan Cox, Chairman of Ashmansworth Parish Council. We have studied this application in depth for several years as it's been modified to try to meet people's requirements. As you say, there are a pair of applications, one for demolition and one for building a new property. I think it's right to say that nobody likes the present house, which is very ugly and out of keeping with the local environment, despite there being very stunning views when not shrouded by the mist. We are the highest village in Hampshire. Permission was earlier granted to extend the present house to make it larger and more attractive, but this has not been carried out because the applicant claimed it would cost more to meet the current build standards than to demolish and rebuild. The new proposal is similar in size to that which had been approved, though allowed to lapse. Some neighbours are complaining, you'll hear from Mr. Haig in a moment, I think, that they'll be overlooked on their patio, despite the fact that other existing houses are already closer with more overlooking of each other. The applicant has taken steps to minimise neighbour objections through modifying the front of the building proposed, and the Parish Council has no objection to this application, which is felt to improve the appearance of a currently unattractive building. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Cox. Any questions for Councillor Cox? No? Thank you, sir. Mr. Haig. You have 4 minutes and I will give you a warning when you've got 1 to go.
Good evening, Chairman and members of the committee. My wife and I and my family have lived in the village for over 17 years. I live in Hallam, opposite the application site, and this scheme before you would cause harm to the amenities that we currently enjoy. The existing house has no windows in the north elevation fronting Cross Lane, and the replacement house would introduce windows at first floor level that would look directly into our rear garden and patio area. You will have seen the photos of the current position from my patio, and this application would only increase that perception of overlooking, which officers have recognised in their report. Amendments were made to the scheme to address the overlooking issue. However, these have not gone far enough. As a local, I have to live here, and I do not want to perceive new neighbours having the ability to look at this private garden area. There must be a design solution where windows in the north elevation, where no windows in the north elevation are proposed, and the replacement house could take advantage of the views available to the south of the property. These current proposals do not offer the right solution. The perception of overlooking is a material planning consideration, and there is an element of harm here. I respectfully request members to either refuse the application in its current form or defer it so the applicant can make changes to the scheme in line with what has been previously suggested, so that the perception of any overlooking is removed. As a minimum, the secondary window serving bedroom 2 should be removed, as it is not required. There are two windows to this bedroom. One is on the north elevation and one is on the west. And if the west one can stay, but if the north one could be removed, it would solve this problem. Other design solutions are also available to the applicant, such as the use of conservation roof lights with a sill height of 1.6 metres from the floor height. These are small changes to the scheme, but it would remove the problem that we're faced with. And I'd be grateful for your consideration of it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Haig. Any questions for Mr. Haig? Councillor Potter.
I wonder if you could just help me really in terms of the distances we're talking about. I mean, it's obviously indicated on the plan, but from your perspective, in terms of your dwelling, your patio area that you're concerned about from the dwelling which is being proposed, what's your figure that you're... Sorry, what's the figure that you're...
I haven't measured it, but this is the view, and this view has been circulated to you as members. And you can see here that this is my patio, this is where we set, and this is the existing roof of the existing bungalow, and although the ridge is about the same on the new proposal as it is, you'll see how directly it overlooks me, and it is recognised by the planning officer that there is overlooking, and this scheme has been amended several times to try and get round it, and would have been refused if it hadn't been amended, and it's now deemed to be acceptable overlooking, which from my point of view I don't think it is, and why should we compromise when it's a new building?
The other thing, if I may, obviously in your photograph there illustrates one aspect of it. There is a substantial hedge, I think, on the boundary of your property, isn't there? And am I right in saying there is a substantial hedge in regard to the boundary of the dwelling that's being proposed as well? Is that right?
That's absolutely correct. There's quite a substantial hedge here, and as you can see, there is no overlooking really from a ground floor or road point of view. There is a gap in the hedge here where there is a gate, but any windows in the roof will overlook me, and it is not something that obviously exists at the moment, and it doesn't need to be designed in this particular proposal.
Councillor Tucker.
Just trying to be helpful, that I believe that on page 158 it mentions at the nearest point there would be a distance of 37 metres between the proposed dwellings and Hallam. Right.
Any other questions? No? Thank you, Mr. Haig. Next, Mr. Floyd, please. You have 4 minutes, and I'll give you a warning of 1 remaining.
Good evening, councillors and Mr. Chairman. My name is Nigel Floeth. I'm the site owner and applicant. Our architect has worked with the planning officer to ensure that the design before you meets planning policy and the requirements of the Ashmansworth Conservation Area. A key point for us is that the design should stand the test of time and fit into the street scene of the village. Regarding concerns about overlooking, the boundary to the north with Hallam is divided by Cross Lane and screened by a 4-metre hedge and trees. Hallam's external amenity area is not directly overlooked. Beg your pardon. It's at an angle of 45 degrees and at a distance of between 37 and 45 metres. It should be noted that anyone walking along Cross Lane can look onto this amenity area over the gate. The proposed design significantly exceeds policy on overlooking on this boundary. The building-to-building distance is 50% greater than the minimum required. The overlooking of the external amenity area distance is more than 100% greater than the minimum required. Good design has also been used to eliminate the possibility of overlooking. The proposed design will be positioned 2 metres east of the current position that you will have seen on your visit. The use of dormer windows on the first floor narrows the field of view, so you can only see directly ahead. The staircase in the entrance hall will curve away from the front of the house, leading to the first floor, where the landing window will use stained glass. We do not see the need to impose the condition on the first floor ensuite window requiring it to be obscured glaze. Our reasoning is, permitted development today would allow us to install as many unobscured Velux-style windows in the roof, on the north-facing roof of the existing red roses. The obscured glazing would be directly in the conservation area important view sightline along the village, along Cross Lane. From the angle of approach along Cross Lane, the window would appear as a solid white rectangle. In conclusion, we feel that as existing rules would allow us to fit an unobscured Velux-style window in the current red roses, there can be no reason to impose a condition requiring the use of obscured glazing on the first floor ensuite window. Considering overlooking specifically, our application considerably exceeds both national and local policy minimum distances. Therefore, I would ask the committee to approve our application without the condition of requiring obscured glazing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Floyd. Questions to the applicant? Any? None. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Floyd. Councillor Isaac, do you want to speak on this one, or are you speaking on the next one?
I'm speaking on the other one, of this one. I don't quite know where it is in the order. I think it's quite, it's number 10, it's on Burn Rain.
Yeah, great. Questions to officers? Any questions to officers? No? Right, open to debate then. Do I have anybody who's going to propose anything? Councillor Tucker?
Propose approval, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Taylor?
Could I just, it all seems to come down to these windows on the north elevation, which is obviously what's concerning the neighbour at Hallam. Now, conditions have been recommended that there's obscurely glazed glass in the bathroom, which I think we would normally expect to happen. I personally think that that's a reasonable recommendation as a condition. But could you just, sorry, this is a question also to the officers, explain what this prism glass is and what the effect would be on overlooking, please?
Yes, I don't think it would help members to look at the elevations in front of you now, which is, let's say, the northern elevation, which is the more immediate windows that overlook the objector's property. So the window on the right of the screen is an ensuite window, which would be conditioned to be obscure glazed. The centre gabled window is to serve a galleried landing, so there's no immediate room behind the window. The landing is set back, so it's not as if somebody would be, immediately adjacent to the window to peer out through the window. But that is proposed to be stained glass window. And then the window, the eave dormer window on the left is where the prism glass would be. I think it is explained on page 158 that the prism window is a type of obscure glazing which allows views only in certain directions. And personally, I'm not sure how that would work. But we were, as officers, we felt that given the distances between the applicant and the occupiers of Hallam, we felt that there was no immediate overlooking issue. So there was no need, although the applicant was offering prism as an option, that if he wanted to do that he could, but we felt that it wasn't appropriate to impose an obscure glazing condition, given especially that it's a bedroom use behind there. And quite right, the objector does note that there is a secondary window in the eastern elevation of the property, but again, because we felt that there was no overlooking issue, it was inappropriate to impose a condition.
Just quickly then, the one that is suggested either for prism or non-obscure would be sort of behind this hedge a little bit more than the other side. Okay, thank you. I would like to second the proposal for approval, but with obscure glaze, I think, in the bathroom.
Right, I have a proposer and a seconder. Can I have those in favour of approval? Hands, please. That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Conditions, please, Nicola.
So,
yes, just to make it clear, that was both papers. Yeah.
So for the replacement dwelling, subject to the condition about the obscure glazing, the condition be not prism, no, be obscure glazed condition, and to secure that window, be approved subject to the conditions on the order paper, and that the demolition for the conservation area consent be approved as agreed on the order paper.
Thank you, Nicola. Now we move on to item number 8, Steele's Farm, and I have got two speakers, Mr. Cox
from the Parish Council and Mr. Hodge in support. And I'll ask officers to introduce it first. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This application is for the erection of an agricultural dwelling at Steele's Farm, Ashmansworth. You'll see from the update report that we've received further comments from the Parish Council supporting the application. In addition, we've received further information as to why there is a requirement for 2 dwellings on the site from the applicant, as well as comments in relation to the Conservation Officer's concerns. More recently, the agent has also brought to the Council's attention some case law which they consider may be relevant to the application. The Borough Solicitor has considered this and offered further advice. Based on this advice, your officer's view remains as per the recommendation in the report that in this particular case the existing farmhouse, which would continue to be occupied by one of the full-time workers, would fulfil the essential functional need to have an agricultural worker living on the farm. The application is recommended for refusal as per the officer's report.
Thank you, Anne. Right, can I have Mr. Cox, please? As before, you have 4 minutes and I'll give you a warning of 1 to go.
Good evening again, Chairman and members. Ashmansworth Parish Council considered this latest application for an agricultural dwelling at Steele's Farm at their meeting in June this year. When we considered their earlier application in 2005, we considered this was for too large a building, too close to other dwellings. However, with the present application, we felt that it was now for a more reasonably sized house, set back from the road, so not too close to neighbours. The present farmhouse is Grade 2 listed, but it is a working farm, not a pretty postcard. And the farm buildings are of varying age and style, so the new dwelling was not thought to impact adversely the appearance of the farmhouse. Indeed, the proposed house is of a traditional style similar to others in the village. Steele's Farm is 3rd generation family run, and you'll find 2 of the generations are behind us in the room now. With limited resources, and we would be anxious not to jeopardize their future viability through refusing this application. We are satisfied that there is a need for staff to be on hand for supervising more than 200 cows at all hours, with calving, milking, and the occasional emergency. Ashmansworth is the highest village in Hampshire and can be cut off in winter, so staff need to be really close by. Most houses in the village are very expensive and inappropriate as farm workers' cottages. The internal layout of the present farmhouse is not really conducive to the 3 generations all living together. We are very aware that our village is in a conservation area with no greenfield developments in about 40 years and are extremely keen to protect our very special environment. However, on this occasion, we unanimously agreed to raise no objection to the application. We do not agree that there is no need for the additional dwelling, and we do not consider that it would have an adverse impact on the visual amenity either locally or in the setting of Ashmansworth Conservation Area or the AONB. It is important for the village to keep its largest farm that has not been sucked into neighbouring very large estates. Occupants of many other houses in the village are now either retired, weekenders or commuters. We feel that we should support our own local enterprise. There has been debate on the best location for the proposed dwelling. The earlier rejected application was for it to be closer to the road and adjacent properties. So this time it has been set back to minimize visibility. It is important to avoid the primary vehicular access being through the farmyard, since it becomes blocked by about 200 cows at milking time. You've got to be able to get a car out at any time. I am not aware of any objections being raised by any local residents or the AONB, etc. We always welcome S106 contributions, but I understand these have not yet been agreed due to the uncertainty of approving the application.
1 minute to go.
Thank Thank you, Jim. I would ask you to avoid excessive demands here, since finances are short and the dwelling is requested for practical reasons, not for profit. We assume that if approved, an agricultural tie would be applied to the property to ensure that it remains associated with the working farm. In summary, the Parish Council supports this application and hopes that an element of localism will be accepted by the committee. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Cox. Any questions for Mr. Cox? Councillor Potter.
Hello, Mr. Cox. I'll try the question, I guess, at some stage with the appropriate officer, but I just wanted your observation as the Parish Council representative. The Conservation Officer, if I read the comments properly in my update sheet, says, amongst other things, that having considered that the built character of the area is one of dwelling houses positioned near the road verges, the new house would infill an area set some distance from the roadside. We saw this on the site visit. Thus would jar with the prevailing character of the street scene. I genuinely don't understand that, and I'll ask the specialist, but what's your observation on that comment?
I did speak to John Willits, the Conservation Officer, this morning to establish his opinion, and I explained that, as I said in my speech, the original proposal had been to be closer to the road, and that it had been moved back because of previous complaints, because it was too close to other properties. Now, you can't have it both ways. And he understood that argument. He still said he'd prefer it to be further forward, but he didn't seem to object. He had had previously some other objections, which on site visit he then found were satisfied, such as the access. Thank you.
Any more questions? Right. Thank you, Mr. Cox. Mr. Hodge. You will have 4 minutes, and I'll give you a warning when there's one to go.
Good evening, councillors. Following the planning officer's report, I'd like to make the following comments. The Fishers have been farming at Steele's Farm for over 60 years and have been expanding their main agricultural enterprise, milk production, since the previous application for a dwelling in 2005 and 2006. The proposed reasons for refusal for this application, I understand, are threefold, and I'd like to go through each one. Firstly, the application has failed to demonstrate an agricultural need for a second dwelling on site. I strongly disagree with this, and for a number of reasons. Firstly, we have shown that there is a need for more than 2 staff to run the agricultural enterprises at Steele's Farm, and this is confirmed by Bruton Knowles, the agricultural consultants for Basingstoke and Deane. In an emergency, there needs to be 2 people on site in case one is milking and the other can be on site immediately to deal with the problem before there is a larger effect on the welfare of that animal. Secondly, all the other dairy farms in the local planning authority area of a similar or larger size have at least 2 dwellings, and I've submitted a list of these farms to the planning officer. And thirdly, the Fishers wish to continue to develop their business, and the essential need for 2 dwellings on site is only going to increase in the future. The second reason for refusal is the adverse impact on the visual amenity and landscape character of the area. Again, I disagree with this. As the planning officer report in the previous application back in 2006 stated that the local planning authority is satisfied that the dwelling should sit comfortably and would be more cohesive within the group of farm buildings. Therefore, the proposed dwelling would preserve both the countryside and the conservation area in which the site lies. The siting of the dwelling in the previous application is the same, or nigh on the same, as the present application. So we don't see why there's a difference between the conservation officer's reports. Our conservation and design consultant, Frank Dowling, has met with John Willits, the conservation officer, and we believe a number of his concerns have now been allayed, further to his original consultation to the planning officer. Also, Basingstoke and Deane's agricultural consultants stated in their report that the siting of the proposed dwelling within the grounds of Steele's farmhouse is the most appropriate location. The third reason for refusal is the lack of legal agreement in place. We're happy to agree the Section 106 as a condition of permission if you're likely to grant. Other matters we'd like to consider are in our sustainable development, as mentioned in the National Planning Policy Framework. A social consideration, as you know, is important. At present, 3 generations of the Fisher family are living in the farmhouse, and we don't feel that is sustainable. As you've seen, I've argued there is a need for 2 dwellings at Steele's Farm for agricultural purposes, which I still stand by. However, following case law, and it's been mentioned in your update, John Keane versus SSE and Aylesbury District Council, the availability of existing dwellings on site occupied by retiring farmers should not be considered as available accommodation, and therefore a new dwelling was required in that case.
1 minute to go.
Further appeals with New Forest Council have confirmed this view, and we believe these cases are extremely relevant to this planning application. In conclusion, I'd ask that the councillors approve this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hodges. Any questions for Mr. Hodge? No? Right, thank you very much. Right, questions to officers, please? Ward Councillor, sorry. You're delighted, thank you. You have 4 minutes and I'll give you a shout at 1.
Right. Good evening, members. I'm sorry not to be able to attend this evening and also not to be able to welcome you to the site visit to Steele's Farm, Ashmansworth. Also, I won't be able to see the update. My comments are supported by my fellow ward member, Councillor Isaac. Refusal is recommended on 2 grounds. First, advisors conclude that it fails the test of agricultural need. Second, officers consider that there is a landscape harm and that the level of harm is sufficient to justify refusal. There's also a matter of section 106, but this can of course be sorted out by condition. I believe that the agricultural case has been misjudged because it has failed to take into consideration the remoteness and relative inaccessibility of the site and the farm. On the site visit, members will have seen for themselves that Ashmansworth is nearly 10 miles from Newbury, the nearest place where an agricultural worker with a family might hope to find a home that they could afford. It is the highest residential hamlet in Hampshire and particularly prone to winter snow and ice. The narrow and in parts very steep roads are not gritted. Public transport is very infrequent, passes well over a mile from the farm and operates a very short day, making it impossible for a cowman to use. Saying that a worker doesn't need to be on the site begs the question, where would a workman live and how would he get to and from his work? As to the landscape aspect, from a personal perspective, I believe that the landscape impact and any negative impact on the conservation area are slight and certainly not sufficient to justify refusal given the benefit to be gained from approval. I note that at the time of the report, the AONOB officer had made no comment. We are well accustomed to applications from people wanting to turn redundant farm buildings into dwellings, and the MPPF and our draft local plan are designed to facilitate new buildings at suitable locations, even in the countryside. Here, by contrast, we have a local family who have farmed here for at least 2 generations, who are successfully growing the actual business of real farming, who want to continue to do so and whose presence is valued by the community, as you've heard this evening. Both common sense and the overall thrust of planning policies suggest that their application should be approved.
Thank you. Will you take any questions, if there are any? Any questions? No? Thank you, Councillor. Right, questions to officers. Are there any? Councillor Band.
Thank you, Chair. Page 12 of 14 of the update sheet. I've done a little sort of like a family tree here on my paper just to try to work out who lives in this farmhouse at the moment. I take it there's a Mr. and Mrs. Fisher who are the grandparents of the son and the daughter who are mentioned, who are the children of Mark Fisher. Is that right? But there's a Gary mentioned. Is Gary one of Mark's children, or is he a son of Mark's brother? Right, okay, thank you.
You have Mr. and Mrs. Fisher Senior. You then have their two sons, Gary and Mark, and then Mark has two children himself, the grandchildren.
It is considered that in this case the occupation of the existing farmhouse by one of the sons would fulfil the need. Where would you suggest the other one went? Or
I think that, sorry, the point I was trying to make was that for this application, they're saying that the new dwelling would be occupied by Mark and his children. And it's understood that Gary would continue to live in the main farmhouse with his parents. And that would fulfill what is considered to be the need for one full-time worker living on the site. So if Mark was to choose to move out, we don't think there's a justification here for allowing another dwelling on the site for an agricultural worker when his brother would remain at the house anyway and fulfill that requirement.
Do I have any other questions?
I find that comment a bit strange, yes. A bit cold almost.
And I would also question Bruton Knowles is advising both sides incorrectly. No more questions? Open to debate. Councillor Miller.
Priorities, not priorities. I think this is a classic example of what we need to see in the countryside. This is a long-established farm, family farm. It's the traditional way that farms have always been evolving within the British Isles, Great Britain, whichever you want to describe it. And to facilitate that continuance in this modern day and age is something we should support wholeheartedly, because so many farms, as was mentioned today, I think get swallowed up by big estates, and the sustainability of a lot of these smaller farms, I think this is about 250 acres, is that, I'm not sure the size, 250 cattle I believe are in the herds. We should do all we can within the rules, with proper design of buildings to support the expansion of families and the longevity of the generations. I've got some questions on the advice that was given, as just been mentioned by the chairman, that you need a combination of houses to house so many people to sustain the particular farm. I've had a very brief experience in my younger days of working on a farm, and it's very important that the workers are there when they're needed. And in remote locations, especially given the unique location of this particular hamlet, I think it is especially important that the living accommodation for those workers, just now and in the future, we can't have a crystal ball to see what's going to happen in 50 years. Hopefully the same family and generations thereafter are going to be still running this farm. So I fully support the applicant in this particular case. I support the ward councillors and the parish council. They have the vision to see that this is what that particular community needs, and I propose that this application is approved. Thanks, Chairman.
Councillor Stone. Right, I have a proposal and a seconder. Do you wish to speak, Councillor Potter? Yes, do.
Very briefly, I mean, it's in support of the principle. I mean, I'm sympathetic to the application. I mean, one thing that I was impressed by, I think, is the independence of this farm in a world where farms like this are just being swallowed up by conglomerates in terms of milk production in particular. And to hear how this one has independently operated and should continue to do so. I mean, we are reminded that in assessing applications, it is considered that the proposed location of the dwelling would be considered to be isolated and therefore should not be allowed unless there are special circumstances. Well, I think we can find a number of special circumstances in terms of the commentary that's been made by the Parish Council and others. And I think there is a need for 2 operatives to be on site, and that should be accommodated by the application.
Thank you. Councillor Tucker.
Well, I first put my hand up before anybody spoke, and everybody said everything that I really wanted to say. But apart from that, so long as there is an agricultural tie, I would be very happy to support it. And I'd like to say that I think the position where the house is now proposed does sit within the other buildings. When we arrived fortunately not when the cows were all in the yard, and we just walked through the buildings, and it was just going to be there, and it just made sense to me, absolutely logical, and I would just support this kind of operation completely. I just wished we'd seen one of the cows.
Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'd fully agree and support this particular application being passed. I have a question. I'm sorry it wasn't one for the officers, but we're picking up here about 106 agreements and such like. Is that really applicable for a sort of tied house, cottage that's not a building in the general terms? Is this something that we are flexible on?
It is a requirement. I mean, it's on the basis that our planning policies don't distinguish between a tied unit and any others, simply on the basis that there would be a similar requirement for facilities and services as there would be with any other house, depending on the occupancy. So from that point of view, it would be required and is consistent with the way that it's been applied on other such applications in the past.
Any more? I have a proposer and a seconder to move approval. Can I have your hands up for approval, please? Yep. Thank you. Unanimous. Conditions?
Chair, if I can perhaps on the basis of very clear reasons that were set out by the members, which were that effectively there is an essential need, or members consider there is an essential need, particularly taking into account the special circumstances of the remoteness of the site, and that effectively there was no adverse landscape impact or impact on the surrounding area. It would be subject to the Section 106 agreement as well, and some recommended conditions which Anne will run through.
Are we agreed? Thank you.
The conditions we're suggesting we'd need a plan drawing numbers condition, a time condition, an agricultural tie condition for the new dwelling, materials, samples to be submitted, window details given it's a conservation area, details of hard standing, landscaping, boundary treatment. We've got some highway conditions for mud and spoil on the road, storage of construction materials, details of the proposed access, parking and turning provision on site, gates to be set back 6 metres, and contaminated land conditions.
Great, thank you very much. Right, we move on to item number 9 now. 2 Willow Way, Sheffield on Loddon. And I have Mr. Thomas, Mrs. Thomas, Mr. Nardi, and that's it to speak. If you could ready yourselves, and I will ask officers to introduce the item.
This application is for the erection of a 2-storey side extension and single-storey front extension, conversion of existing detached garage, and the provision of parking in the front garden. The application is recommended for approval.
Thank you. Right, we'll have Mrs. Thomas, please. You have 4 minutes, and I'll tell you when there's one to go. Okay?
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Michelle Thomas. I live in Willow Way, directly opposite proposed development. Firstly, I'd like to add that I speak on behalf of myself and several of my neighbours who are here this evening. I don't believe that we're objecting to this development per se. I've heard comments that it's a personal development, a personal objection towards this development, and we'd just like to state for the record that that is absolutely not the case. We're just worried about the development that is being proposed. The first thing I would like to say is we do think it's an overdevelopment of the plot. You mentioned in your comments and in your recommendation that the appropriate design relates to surrounding development in a sympathetic manner and is therefore compliant to national planning policy framework, such that the proposed would not dominate or compete with the host building. And I do also note that you saw when you came around that there are other extensions in the area. I would like to point out, however, that there are other buildings in the area that have a side extension. There is another building in the area that has a front extension. There is no other building in Willow Way that would have a side extension and a front extension and a change of use of a garage, and we believe that this would make this particular proposal untenable and overdevelopment of this particular plot. We do also believe that there will be parking issues constituent with this. We understand that the applicants want to park cars in what is ultimately the front garden at the moment. There exist at the moment many parking issues within Willow Way. Many evenings and weekends there are already cars parked, as you can see, on the pavements. From a personal perspective, that poses my husband problems. He's in a wheelchair. It means that he is actually unable to leave the close unaided unless somebody is with him to push him up and down the road or around the parked cars. The change of use from the garage will mean that a car could no longer be parked there. There is existing parking directly in front of that garage which can be used and is still used. I can understand the proposal to move parking to the front, but then that removes further parking for other residents in the area and would further pose problems, we believe. And I do appreciate that it's a chicken and egg scenario. Cars have to be parked somewhere. However, if the garage use wasn't changed and that parking space remained, there would possibly be no need to make the additional changes. There's also a concern from some of my neighbours regarding drainage and runoff. To further make some of this front garden hard landscaping would cause runoff issues. We already have drainage and sewerage issues within Willow Way, many of us having to call to get drains and the like unblocked. And my neighbours in number 6 have already suffered from runoff in times of high rainfall, where the rain has very nearly encroached into their property. We're also slightly confused by the need for a shower room in the garage development. This was originally proposed as a development in the garage with a bedroom, living space and shower room.
1 minute to go.
However, I understand that has now been changed into a games room, and I'm not entirely sure then why you would need a shower room in a games room. And that may have, we believe, issues on drainage. The last issue that we have is regarding the boundary fence, and again, I know that's not necessarily within this plan. However, we have heard the estate agent, because this property is now up for sale, telling potential people coming around to view it that they would have the ability to move the entire fence to the outside of the extant garage. That would directly impose on the shared driveway owned by myself in number 4, number 5 and number 3 Willow Way. We all need that area free for access to our own buildings on a 24/7 basis, and also access for things like having furniture delivered, access for emergency vehicles. To move that fence out would grossly diminish the space for that shared drive, and we don't actually believe that it's part of their land to be able to do that anyway.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions for Mrs. Thomas? Councillor Duff.
Sorry, Mrs. Thomas, are you actually number 4?
No, I'm number 5.
Councillor Potter.
Hello, Mrs. Thomas. I came on the site visit. Can I just confirm with you? I mean, from my observation, I think it's only this property and one other that doesn't actually have a curb crossing at the present time. Is that right?
I couldn't honestly tell you because I haven't been round and counted. I'm just witness to the parking chaos that ensues evenings and weekends.
Sorry, I guess one of the points I make, obviously, is that I think I'm right in saying that, and the sort of on-street car parking which we witnessed, and obviously that wasn't a peak time, inevitably takes place in the chunks of road between where the curb crossings are. Presumably, if this was allowed, it would actually take vehicles off the road anyway, and they wouldn't be parked on the road in some random way. Would that be right?
Not necessarily, because there is existing parking in front of the garage, and of course a car could be parked in the garage, and indeed was parked in the garage in the past. So if the change of use from the garage was not made, and the existing parking space there is used, then there would be no need to do that, thus leaving the additional parking for anybody else that needs it. It should also be mentioned that we have people living in Bow Grove, which is the main road we lead off, who regularly park their cars at the top of Willow Way because of parking issues.
Any more questions? Thank you, Mrs. Thomas. Mr. Nardi. You have 4 minutes and I will warn you when there's one left.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for allowing me to talk. I have been submitting planning applications to this authority for over 30 years, and I can honestly say this is the first time I have encountered so many objections, 12, to such a low-key proposal. I believe there are 4 elements to this scheme and the objections, and I will deal with them individually. Firstly, there's been a total misconception that the boundary fence to the northwest is being moved. This is not the case and never has been, as the application description demonstrates. I can only assume that the site location plan with the ownership indicated in red has been misread. It is necessary to indicate the shared approach to the existing garage as part of the application site, so there's no movement of the boundary fence. Secondly, the parking issues. The existing property is 3 bedrooms. The enlarged proposal remains at 3 bedrooms, and as a result, no further parking spaces are required beyond the 2 existing on site. This conclusion was arrived out in full discussions with the case officer and the highway officer. 1 space is provided as existing to the frontage of the converted garage. 2 others are provided by installing a new drop curb to the frontage and hard standing. Please note that the attached property and those opposite possess drop curb access. And in answer to that gentleman's question, he was quite right. There are only 2 properties in that road that do not have drop curbs. It has been stated by objectors that the proposed off-street parking will restrict parking on the road. I find this difficult to understand, that parking would have been on-street is now to the property frontage. It is normal practice not to park across dropped curbs. And please note that this element does not require planning permission. Thirdly, the garage conversion. The original single garage has been legitimately extended to a double. The original external parking space remains and is retained. The other section of the garage opens into the garden. The conversion is to provide ancillary accommodation for the dwelling. It is not a separate dwelling unit. And please note that this conversion equally does not require planning permission. Fourthly, the extension. I have approvals for hundreds of extensions of this nature. It is proven acceptable. Indeed, the property opposite, number 11, has a very similar side extension which would have been seen at the viewing committee, and number 10, a more prominent single-storey front extension. The width of our extension complies with guidelines in its proportions to the host dwelling. The first floor element is set back from the main elevation, resulting in a subservient roof line. The ground floor small forward projection replaces a less attractive flat roof porch. The first floor side bedroom window is situated in excess of 20 metres from the property to the side, and this completely complies with guidelines. During the viewing committee's visit, I was questioned about the for sale sign. The applicants are so upset about the degree of objection that they have decided to move. However, they wish to pursue, thank you, Chair. However, they wish to pursue this application as an incentive for potential purchasers. In conclusion, the boundary fence is not being relocated. The parking provided is considered adequate and provides an additional space from the existing. The dropped curb does not require planning permission. The garage conversion is permitted development and does not require consent. The extension is entirely within proven guidelines. Thank you for the opportunity to speak, and I hope you're able to approve the scheme.
Questions for Mr. Nardi? No? Oh, sorry, Councillor Potter.
Hello, Mr. Noddy. I guess this might be more difficult if the owner who has commissioned you is now leaving, but just to put Mrs. Thomas's mind at rest, can you explain to me what the provision of the shower room is adjacent to the games room and study? What's the logic behind that?
It's so that it can be used independently and not keep running it back up to the house just to, yeah, so somebody can use it independently. Yes.
Any more questions? Thank you, Mr. Nardi. Councillor Tomlin, your ward councillor, do you wish to speak?
Thank you, Chair. It's a very interesting application. I think it illustrates when permitted development can sometimes lead to issues. I mean, we went on the members went on the site viewing, and it was obviously on a day when people had gone to work, and there weren't that many cars parked on the street. Clearly, I think as we debate this, I'd ask members to consider that we have by approving this application, are we reducing people's amenity because of the parking issue? Obviously, permitted development says we can drop the curbs and such like. But what's happened here is parking spaces have been eroded in some respects by this garage being converted, which of course it has permission to do so. And also perhaps we could consider, and I think there is discussion of conditions on the use of this building, because should this building, if we can stop it having a bedroom of some sort, then would that itself then encourage more people to reside in the property in the future, and thus exacerbate the issue with the parking? So really those are the sort of things that I would say, is that it's a difficult one. In theory, is the building too big? Well, I think we've kind of moved on from that one. We're actually considering parking, but as we've had it outlined, it's all actually quite permissible. But it's just the overall allowing it, would it cause more problems? So perhaps we can see what we think on debate. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Councillor Tomlin? No. Questions to officers? Councillor Potter.
Right, Chairman. I just want to be absolutely clear, and I think I understand. I mean, clearly, it is the case. I think if this was broken down into elements, that we could have a creation of a hard standing and curb crossing, that could just be done, wouldn't require any approval. That could be done first. Let's put it that way. The the conversion of the garage again could be permitted development. That could be done. And therefore, you know, depending on the approach of this, and I understand the logic and the economics of doing it all together, but if it was broken down into those sort of elements, then most of this would be permitted development on which we'd have no commentary to make. And it's a more honest approach, it seems to me, for the current owner to come to us with the complete package and let that be judged in its own right. Is that the way this is worked out?
Yes, you're correct in that the garage could be converted as long as it remains as a use incidental to the main dwelling. Then that could be done as permitted development, and also the creation of a hard standing in a front garden can also be done as permitted development.
Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question. A hard standing in this context, when new developments are built, hard standings tend to be, these regulate, I think the rules are that they should be permeable. This is a new hard standing in an existing property. Does the same thing apply?
We haven't put a condition on to say that we want details of the final surfacing of the area of parking. That is something that could be suggested if members were minded to go with the officer's recommendation. As it stands at the moment, this would grant planning permission for a hard standing without insisting on it having a permeable covering, because there is no condition.
Councillor Tucker.
Can I continue that one? As we've heard from the objector that water runoff, etc., is a problem, I think it would be a good idea to have it as a condition.
Any more? Right, open to debate. Yes, do. Thank you. Seconder. Thank you, Councillor Taylor. I have proposer and seconder to approve this motion. Can I have hands in favour for approval? Thank you. Those against? One. Thank you. Conditions, please.
So it's recommended to the conditions as per the report, but what we're suggesting is that condition 6 could be expanded to also include the requirement of the submission of hard-standing materials, so that we get to view the hard-standing materials up front, and that we could expand the reason for that condition to ensure adequate drainage. The hard-standing on the parking area at the front, that's what we're talking about.
Excuse me, Chair, but we do use some standard expressions when new developments come up about permeability. Isn't that appropriate to just translate that into this particular application?
We can specifically say that the details of a permeable final surfacing to be submitted, and then I think it'd be then sensible to also include in the reason that it's for drainage reasons. Okay, thanks.
Good. Right. We're all in agreement. So we move on to item number 10, please, Burnbrae House. I have two speakers, Mr. Bobby and Councillor Isaac. But I will first of all ask Nicola to introduce it, if you would be so kind. Thank you.
This application is for the erection of a 3-bedroomed retirement dwelling and a new access. Members will remember viewing the site last Friday, and that on the update it should be noted that the Section 106 has now been signed since the completion of the officer's report, so reason refusal number 3 has now to be taken off should members go with the officer's recommendation. And also members will remember when viewing the site there was aerial photographs displayed showing what was on the site and where there was ruins, and the officers have done some research on the planning history of the site and have found that the current existing property at Burnbrae House is a replacement dwelling for the one of the ruins that members saw on site. So the recommendation is still for refusal in that there's no special circumstances being shown for a new dwelling in the countryside, and that it's not a sustainable form of development, and that there are adverse impacts on the area of outstanding natural beauty and the setting of the conservation area.
Thank you, Nicola. Mr. Bobby. You have 4 minutes and I'll tell you when there's one to go.
Thank you. Thank you, members of the committee. I'm here to explain to you on behalf of the applicants the 6 reasons why we feel that it is appropriate to grant planning permission for this application. Firstly, the location, design and character of the development. You will see from the drawing above and also from the 3D rendering that was supplied with the application that the proposal will be low-lying, barely visible from the north or the east, invisible from the south and the west, and it complies with the density and grain of development within the village. There are houses and gardens to the north, east and to the west, and the site is part of the built fabric of the village. It's on the very edge of the AONB, along with other properties, and shielded from the main body, blistered off, separate from the main body of the AONB by a line of established mature tree planting. Secondly, the new access. This proposal will create a safer new access and will block off the existing unsafe, dangerous access on the bend. And this is one of the reasons why the Parish Council positively approve of this application. There have been no objections to my knowledge, and a positive approval from the Parish Council. Thirdly, sustainability. This is a sustainable proposal. It will generate a maximum of 5 two-way trips per day. Many, if not most of those, will be by public transport. The distance from Burnbrae House to Eccleswell bus stop is 200 metres. That is a 3-minute walk. The bus runs from there to all the local schools and makes 2 trips to Newbury every day, 6 days per week. From Kingsclear, which is 1.5 miles away, there is an excellent bus service to Newbury and to Basingstoke, and that is used daily by the applicants themselves, was used by their son daily as he commuted to Basingstoke College. Fourthly, there is the fact that this is previously developed land. It doesn't matter how it came to be previously developed, whether the old cottage became derelict and was abandoned, or whether it was superseded by a future planning application. It is developed land. You will have seen that from your site visit. You will have seen the slab, you will have seen the gatepost, you will have seen the telephone wire, and that will be the footprint of the new property. It was demolished in the 1970s, and it was a residential dwelling. You can see that on the old Ordnance Survey plan. There's a letter that has been supplied to the local authority from a resident saying that it was a residential dwelling house. Fifthly, the emerging local plan. There is the current local plan is outdated, and there is a pre-submission local plan which was placed before the full council in July of 2013.
1 minute to go.
This emerging planning guidance or your existing planning guidance, which we say favours this application, should be read in light of the emerging planning guidance, which favours it even more. In particular, it favours residential proposals that have the support of the local parish council. That's outside of settlement policy boundaries. It also favours development proposals outside of settlement policy boundaries will be permitted where they are on previously developed land, which is defined as land which is or was occupied by a permanent structure. And we say you should take that into account. That is emerging planning guidance. Finally, there are the personal circumstances of the applicants. They wish to remain in the village where they've lived for 28 years. Their son is buried in the local churchyard. He died from cancer aged 21. They have a straightforward need for a retirement dwelling. There is a pressing need for such developments in 1s and 2s to allow the village to grow slowly as the parish council recommend. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Bobby. Any questions for Mr. Bobby? No? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Councillor Isaac. Four minutes and I'll tell you when there's one.
I'm sure you will. Good evening, Chairman. Good evening, Committee. As Ward Councillor, I felt that on a number of grounds it would be appropriate to request referral of this application to you rather than seeing it refused by delegation. In this, I'm supported by my fellow Ward Councillor, Councillor Mitchell. I'm aware of the committee's recent decision on 3 White Hill, Etchinswell, which is referred to in the report, but I think there are some important differences, not least about the physical design and impact on neighbours of that proposal, as well as the poor argument made for the relevance of the Bishop's Green shop, which is too far away. The parish council, like me, opposed 3 White Hill, but supports this application. In relation to the 2 main grounds for refusal, I do question the officer's recommendations. Firstly, the site is clearly not isolated, but on the edge of the village, as the officers concede. Etchinswell has no settlement policy boundary, so to describe the site as being outside it is rather misleading. I think it is the right sort of place to be building and I don't agree that it would have an adverse impact on the conservation area. I know Etchingswell very well. Etchingswell operates well as a sustainable community. It is a primary school, a pub, a well-used community hall, and perfectly adequate bus services. It needs additional housing such as this, including retirement homes. And I think an approval would be consistent with the MPPF presumption in favour of development. Secondly, I don't accept that the development would have an urbanising effect on the village or be unsympathetic to or adversely impact on the landscape of the ANOB, which is clearly important. A visit to the site persuaded me that a single house here, within the village envelope and separated by an established, mature garden boundary and in a concealed, low-lying location, would not be detrimental to the ANOB.
1 minute to go. Any questions for Councillor Isaac? No? Thank you, sir. Questions to officers? Thank you, Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a question for the officers pertaining to reasons for refusal. And we're back to this old discussion about a new dwelling in the countryside. We've been here before. There is evidence, I understand, that was a previous structure on this particular site. And it was a cottage demolished in 1970. Is that true?
Yes, as outlined in my introduction to the item, the research has shown that the existing dwelling is a replacement for the structure that was on the site.
Then I have a problem about why it's being described as a new dwelling in the countryside when there's already been one there. That's my question on the wording of the reason for refusal. I don't correlate the two, what you just said. That's why I asked the question in a particular way.
Essentially, the previous dwelling has been replaced by the one that's on site now. So that old dwelling, if you like, has been extinguished in terms of its use and its appearance there as a second dwelling on the site, because it's never been there in existence with that one that's there now. So this is a new dwelling, a net gain, if you like, of one over and above the existing.
Okay, I worded my question very specifically. On this site we're referring to in the application. It's not strictly true. Bearing in mind the red and the blue lines on the... Anyway, it doesn't matter. Thank you very much for your answer.
Councillor Potter.
Thank you, Chair. I wonder if I could just ask the officers and clarifying this for me, really, in regard to the commentary about the proposal would not be a sustainable form of development and no justification has been demonstrated for a retirement dwelling as exceptional local need. In terms of that justification, what form does that have to take? I mean, simply when we spoke to the applicants, we had an eloquent description of future needs in terms of what they saw as their requirements as they got older, and this was a design dwelling, specifically designed dwelling to take account of that. I think probably many of us would like to be in that position if I'm truthful, but assuming that they are telling the truth in regard to the need that they see for themselves, it appears to me there's an intention to move from the house they're in into this one for their retirement and to plan accordingly and to demonstrate that A, in what they say, and B, in the way they design this future dwelling. I don't quite know, sorry, forgive me, what we need in the way of evidence beyond that. Is there something?
In essence, there isn't. I mean, the reference to exceptional need really covers the scenarios, or similar ones that we considered earlier on today. Exceptional need in a particular location, say for example, an agricultural workers dwelling, or if there was if you're looking more along the sort of rural exceptions for affordable housing, things like that are exceptional circumstances that would, if you like, allow dwellings in a location which otherwise they would not be allowed. Now, just to sort of, I suppose, draw the differences between this proposal and the one at 429 Worthing Road, which was in some ways helpfully on the same agenda today. That one was recommended for approval on the grounds that it was in a sustainable location, being very close to Basingstoke town, etc. In this instance, it's felt that this particular location is not sustainable, taking into account the previous position taken on number 3, White Hill. So that, if you like, in looking at that sort of planning balance that we keep hearing about in various forms, means that it counts against, in those terms, it's not a sustainable form of development, and that's why the recommendation is for refusal on this occasion.
Any more questions? Right, open to the debate. Is it, nobody got anything to say? Councillor Potter, thank you. Councillor Taylor next.
I'm sure I'm boring everybody this evening, forgive me, Chair, but I mean, my own view, and it's a situation we'd find, I'd like to say it's objective, but I guess some of my comments are subjective, but I mean, I couldn't disagree more with some of the commentary that's in the officer's reasoning here, really, when I looked at it and when we went on site and when we were able to observe physically what we had read from the officers. I couldn't see genuinely, for an area that has no policy boundary anyway, for this to have the sort of urbanising effect that it's described, this single unit in that position. I genuinely don't understand what those words mean. I know they're planning words within the context of the MPPF and the like, and to say it wouldn't be sympathetic to the landscape character, again, in terms of the area of natural beauty that Councillor Isaac's comment on it, again, I'm tempted to say things like, where's the harm? And I know it's not a planning observation, and I probably would draw that straight away, but really that is the way that I think a number of us looked at it when we were there. But in regard to the arguments that are submitted, I do disagree with them. I honestly do believe that there's a demonstrable need for the dwelling. It's been described to us, and I think it would have, I would have thought, the sort of roll-on effect that we want. This is, dare I say, older people planning for their retirement, moving out of houses which are too big for them and not suitable for that retirement need, thereby vacating this house, I hope perhaps for a family unit within this village who clearly would be more self-sufficient and clearly would help, I think, to contribute to the village life. In terms of the impact of this dwelling in regard to the area around, I think it would be minimal, and therefore I genuinely would want to contest that and say that I'd want to move this for approval.
Thank you. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you. I thought the case for this was very well and convincingly put, and I congratulate the presenter on it. Now, I'm only bringing out a precedent here because there is one in the officer's report, but I would suggest that there are more secure grounds for approval of this one than a similar application at Colpinnon House, which the committee approved. This is quite similar in many ways. It's accommodation in the grounds of another house for an elderly couple. We approved that one. I think this one makes even more sense to me. It looks like a desirable home in a pretty sustainable location, and it's already been seconded, but I would very much like to see this one approved. Thank you.
I have a proposal and a seconder. Can I move this for approval? Hands up, please. Passed unanimously. Thank you. Conditions, please, Nicola.
Chair, I think with regards to this, bearing in mind that there is an outstanding appeal on the one at number 3, I think it'd be right that there are some specific reasons for approval put forward. That's not trying to be difficult, but I think it's just right that there are specific reasons put forward as to why this particular site has anything exceptional about it to mean that it should be approved.
I mean, I always hesitate getting into the position I got into, really, because it's turning things on its head, I accept, but, you know, it has to be done, really. And I despair on occasions, obviously, having to be the one that actually contests what the officers recommend. Genuinely, I say this, because it isn't easy. I think, certainly, we can argue that it is in a sustainable form. Sorry, it is a sustainable form of development. We've heard evidence in regard to the proximity of public transport, which makes it very different, I think, to one or two others that we've looked at. I think there has been demonstrated the need for a retirement dwelling, and by definition that creates that exceptional local need. It couldn't be more local. It's the people that own the land who are going to move into it. And on that basis, I think we can argue that it satisfies, the safe policies D6 and C4. I think in regard to, the actual design of the unit itself, I don't think that it, I think we could say that it's empathetic to the area and would be sympathetic to the landscape character. And I think in that regard, really, we're finding, I hope, reasons which would sustain the approval that we're giving it.
Conditions, please, next. Thank you, Councillor Potter. That was very helpful.
Yes, the suggested conditions would be time limit, 3-year time limit condition, the plan numbers, appropriate to secure appropriate landscaping scheme, contaminated land and verification conditions, hours of construction and delivery of construction materials. To cover highway issues would be like a construction method statement, details of the means of access, the stopping up of the existing access, conditions to control the gradient of the drive, and that any gates shall be set back a minimum distance of 6 metres, conditions to secure turning and unloading, and the appropriate provision for the parking and storage of cars and bicycles.
Councillor Tucker.
I just wondered whether the fact that it would improve the access, it will be a plus, a highway plus. Is there any way of adding? Yeah.
Right, we'll move on to item.
It's difficult to know if these are reasonable conditions or not. So why should the gate be set back 6 metres? You don't have to tell me. It's just that I wonder if, in conjunction with the ward member, we could just make sure that these are reasonable conditions. I mean, it just worries me, that they might take weeks or months to actually discharge.
I'll talk more generally. I know there have been issues raised about conditions being imposed in the past and whether they're reasonable or not. I think the list that was suggested there is reasonable for the type of property being put forward. And I think the more detailed ones around things like gates being set back really tie into the improvements being sought in terms of the access. So it's sort of making sure that improvement is captured and maintained going forward by having those sorts of conditions imposed.
Right, good. Item number 11, Blacklands Farm. I have no speakers on this. So
yes. Good evening. Thank you. This, as you'll see, is item number 11. It's a lawful development certificate application. So it's slightly different from the normal planning applications that are before you. However, we've had a number of these over the last year or so. So I believe you're relatively familiar with the process. In particular, this relates to a mobile home sited at Blacklands Farm used as a residential dwelling. First of all, can I just draw your attention to a small error that I made? It's on the first page of your report, so that's page 199, I believe. It's just at the bottom, so where it says 10-year use up to the date of application, i.e. October 2002 to October 2012, that should in fact read July 2003 to July 2013. So apologies for that. You'll see that actually at the beginning of the report I do refer to a 10-year use, and that's because that would be the starting point. When a mobile home application comes in for use as a mobile home, we consider that to be a change of use of the land, and we would have to assess whether that had been in use for 10 years. As I went out on site, and there'll be a photograph coming up shortly, it was quite evident that this wasn't any old mobile home as I imagined I would see. It was in fact much more of a structure. The mobile home is in fact hidden inside that building. It has wood cladding, there's brick walls surrounding it, there's a roof, and there's various extensions. What that led me to do is consider whether actually is this a mobile home, or is it in fact a structure, and in which case if it's a structure it becomes a building with a use changed to a single dwelling, which then results in me having to consider it for 4 years as opposed to 10 years. As you'll have seen from my report, I viewed that it was a building, and I've carried on with the 4-year use. The applicant has provided evidence to show that they've been there for approximately 10 years and they've lived there during that period as their residential home. There was additional evidence, and on that basis I believe there is sufficiently precise and unambiguous evidence to show that the building has been, or the mobile home is a building and has been used as such for 4 years. It's amazing, isn't it? Thank you. Sorry.
We've no speakers, we've no councillor, have we? Councillor Goodison.
Yeah, I'm the ward councillor.
My apologies.
Well, the officers, as the officers demonstrated, they're quite satisfied that sufficient evidence has been given to them by the applicant to justify them in recommending approval. The parish council has considered it and is in approval, and so I would like to move that we accept the proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, we're not quite in debate yet. Questions to officers? Right, Councillor Miller.
I'm not quite sure who I address this to either Suzanne or the local planning authority, but this strikes me as obtaining a building on a site by stealth without planning permission. Would this building, if it was as per these photographs, to be erected in that site, would it need planning permission?
Yes, it would. So this is essentially the process that's permissible by existing planning regulations, which is that if certain structures have been there for more than 4 years, in this case because it is a single dwelling, then it becomes lawful. It becomes immune from enforcement action, which is what effectively the LDC application is testing.
I'm very uncomfortable to see that this was a mobile home that's been encased in cladding that hasn't been picked up by enforcement, and now we're treating it as a building without planning permission. I'm not inclined at all to give any approval for this, because this is building by stealth. But if this is a way that people are getting around the planning system, I'm afraid I will express my disappointment that enforcement haven't picked it up.
I think on the issue of enforcement, I mean, the enforcement service is largely reactionary because it picks up on when complaints have been received around certain types of development which have been causing harm. Unfortunately, in certain situations, particularly in more isolated locations, sometimes those things aren't brought to our attention, so we can't react in the time that's required to stop it becoming lawful in the first instance.
Councillor Potter.
I mean, I understand where Councillor Miller is coming from, but as I understand it, I mean, this is not something for us to determine on planning grounds anyway, is it? So, you know, I mean, I understand where you're coming from, but it isn't within our remit to apply the normal test we might with a planning application anyway, is it?
It was more.
Any more questions for officers? No? Right, debate. I have it moved and I have it proposed and seconded. Can I have hands for approval? Carried. No, not unanimously.
Possibly the committee might think that it would be useful to send a letter to the applicant expressing some concern about the way this has appeared on his site. Thank you.
We can do that. Yeah, we will do that. Thank you. We have to move standing orders. Do I have your agreement? Agreed. Thank you. Now we need conditions, don't we? No, no, we don't. Right, we move on to item 12, which I think I can move from the chair. And I have it seconded. Are we in agreement? Agreed, thank you. Paper C.
Thank you, Chair. It's just with regards to paper C, there was a few things I just wanted to bring to members' attention. One of which isn't actually on the paper itself, but is a brief update on following the minor part decision, which I know has been circulated before. But in the first instance, I wanted to bring members' attention, or draw members' attention to paragraph 1.4 of paper C, and in particular the £65,000 cost settlement that has been made. And really, given the amount involved, I thought it was right to give some more background as to where that came from and where it came in. But essentially, it was an appeal that was, so it was a decision made under delegated powers. It wasn't a committee decision. It was a decision made under delegated powers, whereby the appeal decision was actually reported back in June 2012, because this quarterly report picks up the course at the time. The award of costs, so the decision to award costs against the council, was made at that same time, so the inspector gives both decisions. The actual settlement of costs only happened in this quarter of this paper, on the grounds that we've been effectively going through what had been submitted. And I think in this particular instance there was slightly unusual or very unusual circumstances whereby the approach to the appeal that had been taken, which was an informal hearing, was to employ a barrister and various planning consultants to effectively sort of put the case forward for the appellant. Which is more akin to, if you like, what you'd expect with a public inquiry, but it was taken in formal hearing. There's nothing to stop anyone from doing that, but it did undoubtedly escalate the costs claim that then eventually came in. To give some indication, there was over 300 pages of evidence submitted by the appellant in their case in terms of this particular part. We did go through the cost claim very carefully. I personally took involvement in that. In the sense of trying to set out what we felt was reasonable from the initial claim, which was greater than what the final amount settled on. But we did come to a point, having employed cost assessors, whereby if we continued to try and reduce the cost amount, the likelihood is we'd have had to go to cost assessment, whereby we'd have been into potential for further legal costs and potential interest as well. So unfortunately, we did settle at the significant amount there, but I did feel it was appropriate to bring it to members' attention given the amount involved. The other reason for bringing it to members' attention is that as of yesterday, the 1st of October, there's actually been a change now in the way that costs are awarded at appeal. Previously, an appellant or the council would have to actually put forward an application and say that one party or other had acted unreasonably in some way, then an inspector would judge whether they had acted unreasonably and then award costs or not. As of yesterday, or appeals submitted as of yesterday, an inspector can do that outright. They don't have to have an application in from anyone. So on any appeal, an inspector could turn around and say either the appellant or the council has acted unreasonably in a form, and the costs could be awarded against. So I suspect there will be more costs, applications and issues to raise and bring back to this forum. Generally speaking, we do relatively well in terms of rebutting cost claims. Equally, we have had some where we've been awarded costs where we've pursued them on the unreasonable service of the other side. But that was the reason for really bringing that particular part to members' attention. I was going to take any questions on that part or move on to the minor part decision. Thanks, Jay. It was just, with regards to Minor Park, it was really, and in some ways been helpful obviously with the discussion around the earlier items, because there were some issues which came out of the Minor Park decision which I think are helpful both in terms of the way, the conclusions, if you like, that were drawn by the inspector, but also the way the inspector came to his conclusions, which I think will inform the way decisions we made in future, in all planning senses. Just in terms of the principal issue of prematurity, the inspector found that the proposals would not be so substantial or cumulatively so significant that the plan would be prejudiced in terms of scale, location of phasing. So this is the issue of obviously the application going before the local plan, and this issue of how significant or substantial does it have to be before it becomes potentially prejudicial. Now at a scale of 450 dwellings, the inspector found that it wasn't so substantial that it would have a prejudicial impact. So I think that gives us quite a clear steer, if you like, in terms of where we are now and what other applications are coming forward. Exactly. Then in terms of this, we've mentioned it a couple of times tonight, the sort of balancing approach to planning now, the benefits to disbenefits. I mean, this was quite useful the way that the inspector set this out. He set it out in the context of the housing supply position, i.e. the current housing supply position being a serious and significant shortfall. So he felt that the housing supply that was being provided was a significant benefit. Equally, the affordable housing element was a significant benefit to it as well. In terms of the transport and biodiversity issues, you may recall there was biodiversity issues around great crested newts, and there were transport issues in terms of sort of sustainability and traffic impact. The inspector found those to be relatively neutral impacts. So again, just thinking about that balance. In terms of sustainability, the inspector didn't agree with the points put forward. He found that there are some services and facilities within a 10-minute walk distance and a range within a 25-minute walk or easy cycling distance, which perhaps extends it a bit further than what used to be acceptable terms of sustainability, where it used to be more around the sort of 5-10 minute walking time. So again, I think things have probably changed slightly. Then there were issues which the inspector found would be harmful to a point, and that was around community cohesion, where he felt that it would have had a quite significant impact, bearing in mind the local community had such an impact over 10 years, particularly around noise and disturbance, but had found that it would be a sort of a temporary impact. So he accepted there would be some harm, but it would be temporary. He then also found some harm with regards to the landscape impact, where he said, in terms of landscape and visual intrusion, development on a greenfield site would impact on the landscape character of the immediate area, as it would anywhere. However, the site is contained by topography and existing and new landscaping. He then went on to say the landscape and visual impact in this case would conflict with local plan policy E6, but the impact would be slight. So again, just thinking about that balancing, there are occasions where a particular issue might have an adverse impact, but when you look at the whole, the balance may still be that the development should be approved. So an adverse impact on one part might not necessarily lead to refusal.
Could I just ask, you talked about the cycling distance, walking distance block. Is that just that inspector's interpretation, or would it be general amongst the inspectorate?
Honestly, I don't know at this stage. I think what we're seeing with appeal decisions generally, and this applies to not just large-scale housing, but others as well, is that there does seem to be a slightly more relaxed approach to sustainable development, i.e., more development in slightly less sustainable locations than previously pursued, particularly through things like Planning Policy Guidance 13, as was.
Councillor Potter.
Thank you, if I may. I mean, I don't want to revisit this over much, but just to say to you, I think you might be interested. I mean, in terms of our observations of the great crested newt population this year, in regard to disturbances that they've experienced already, this is not just anecdotal, it's ecologists who have far better knowledge than I. I mean, we're not seeing them in the numbers we did, they're not moving in the way that they did, and quite frankly, they won't survive this major new development. Whatever people might theorise about, that's going to be the fact of it really, once this starts. And in regard to what the inspector describes as in a sense, acceptable disturbance of the local community vis-à-vis the building works. I mean, best estimates suggest we're talking about a 5-year period, you know, and some of the people that I claim to represent in Jersey and Guernsey Close, who've suffered massively over the years, are now going to be having to have another 5 years of construction going in that way through to the main site, which may be, you know, described in the way it is in an inspector's report, but it's pretty significant, I think, really. The other thing I just wanted to check, and I mean, there's been loads of people sort of saying different things in terms of further challenges to the decision, which I've said to people not to even think about, quite frankly, and I hope the council won't be doing it. I know it won't, sorry. And I hope Sherborne St John Parish Council won't, or Edward Dawson won't really, who seems to be out to make a bit more money on this anyway. But my understanding is that not only would we have, you know, we're not on Warebone, joking apart, but I don't mind, I'll say it, but I mean, in terms of fees that have been paid so far to the planning consultant, there would be more to be earned, of course, but I mean, clearly, we would have little chance, I think, of success. It would have to be, as I understand it, on points of planning law in regard to the inspector's decision. And my further worry would be, as I understood it, that whilst David Wilson Holmes appeared to be magnanimous in not seeking costs against us in regard to the original appeal, because they were particularly comforted by the fact that we're going to win it, I think. And I mean, they could come back and look at that if this was to be taken to some further level of appeal. Is that right?
We're still in, just so everybody knows, we're still in public.
Yeah, that is right, Councillor Potter. Absolutely. Effectively, the challenge would be to the High Court. It would be on a point of that there'd been something incorrect, if you like, in the way the inspector had interpreted policy or had come to his conclusions, and it was felt from the council's perspective that there wasn't any claim. But you're absolutely right. If that was taken forward, then there could be challenge on costs based on if the council then lost that part as well. The other thing I just want to draw the members' attention was that clearly we obviously this will be no doubt brought up by the appellant when they come to the Kennel Farm inquiry, which is due for, I think it's the 20th of November when that starts, but also to bring members' attention, and I know some members are aware already that we have now also received an appeal for non-determination on Razors Farm planning application, which is, I think, largely based around waiting to obviously understand what this decision meant and implications, and then that is a non-determination as well. So what we will be doing is bringing a report forward to members to say, well, this appeal for non-determination is in, what would you have done in terms of the application had it been taken to its conclusion? Because obviously we'll need to understand that in terms of taking a position at appeal.
Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Chair. I think I've suspected what's going on with these appeals for a long time, when it's very hard to read the mind of an inspector when the local communities express opinions of applications. There are some empirical breakpoints that we can look at, but when it comes to subjective viewpoints on landscape, on the environment, we don't always challenge officers, but we challenge the policies, because the way the policies are written, you can challenge them from a subjective point of view. But if we can't even get any idea on the subjective views of the inspectorate, especially with the bigger applications that we've gone through and we're going to get, I didn't know about Razors Farm, so thank you very much for that. I think we're going to be continuing in this dilemma, because these subjective arguments can go on forever, because the inspector doesn't need to demonstrate it empirically. We can't produce an empirical evidence on these particular things. And I don't know where it leaves local planning authorities and certainly local development control committees, because we're here representing our communities, both individually and community in the bigger sense. But we get knocked down by the inspectorate, or even higher up the chain. I'm not coming up with an answer, I'm just presenting a view of where we're in, almost getting the bigger rocks that we get in between, and the hard place. It's very disappointing, I think, that somebody mentioned localism a few years ago, and I don't see it yet.
Councillor Tomlin was first.
Sorry, David. With actually two things now, but the first thing was you were saying precedent set by obviously the inspector's points that he's raised. Where does that leave us when, for instance, our local plan or the transport assessment, the road improvements, and that joined up thing about we need, if one comes along, the effect of the other? He's now passed one, and so the contributions and the schemes may see, I don't know, the A33 being dug up, and then the next one comes along and that contribution have to make it be dug up again. Is there any, how do we handle that? I have a second question.
Well, essentially, I think that's the issue that's being raised around the whether it's a substantial amount of development in the first instance, and the way the inspectors seem to be viewing this, and this isn't just in relation to Marnell Park, but appears to be in relation to others as well, is that developments of a certain size, and it's very difficult to say at what point, because it obviously depends on the context of that development in relation to what it's joining, but developments of a certain size won't prejudice, in their view, how the local plan will come forward. So what it's effectively saying is, take the Marnell Park as an example, that 450 dwellings isn't of a significant amount to prejudice the wider, if you like, fitting together of other sites going forward in the local plan. It can come forward in its own way, with its own improvements, so on and so forth. That's unfortunately the message we are getting from the planning inspectorate.
Obviously sounds a particularly precarious path for us. And then you just mentioned razors. Obviously that was news to myself as well. But there is a question I have particularly with that one. We've just seen amended plans been submitted. So if they're amending plans, and how can they possibly say we haven't determined it if they're still giving us information? Which incidentally was about road, one of them about road modifications, which I'm sure would be doubly added to with what I just said about Marnell Park.
I mean, essentially, the non-determination can happen at any point after the 13 or 16 week date of the application. So 13 weeks for major, 16 weeks for major with an environmental statement. What we can do is seek written confirmation from the applicant that they're happy to extend that time period, which is what we had been doing with Razors Farm. That then ceased at a certain point, and then they are able to appeal on non-determination at any point after that. So it's simply a time thing.
Councillor Potter.
Kevin, if you permit me, I mean, having regard to the fact that I said what I did, I mean, perhaps I ought to qualify. It was probably wrong of me to name Mr. Dawson in particular, although I make the point. I mean, I think he's been fairly high profile over this matter. The point I seek to make, I think, is that my view, and I think it's sustained by what Mike has been saying, is the possibility of further appeal would probably be very remote and probably likely to not succeed. And therefore what I have counselled caution about, both to the parish council and my own people in Popley East, is that we shouldn't engage in further expensive consultancy over a matter which I think is doomed to failure with respect, and therefore that's the point I make. Enough money has been spent on the representation that we've had thus far. That's the end of the matter, I think.
Of course you may.
Just on the report, if you put something like land at the barn, Folly Farm, could we know where Folly Farm is? Because there's lots of Folly Farms in the borough.
Yeah, I should say, just in terms of the actual main appeals report, Appendix A, the reason for bringing those three land at Folly Farms, land at Barn, sorry, Folly Farms to members' attention was simply that there's a collection of appeals which also involved an enforcement appeal as well, all of which were dismissed, which was, I think, a good outcome, bearing in mind it involved quite a significant amount of work around all of those, and does prove that enforcement can be effective in taking it through to appeal.
Good. We're required as members to note the outcomes of the appeal decisions and the reasons given for those decisions. We agreed that we're happy with that. Thank you. So we go on to paper 12. Yes, do.
Under Rye Cottage in Silchester, it's page 11. It says the development proposes erection of a replacement garage. Actually, it was a house. Garage was involved as well, but replacement house. Exactly, but the beginning is wrong. So it is my patch, that's why.
Councillor Barnes.
I have a question.
I can't promise I'll answer it.
I mean, you won't answer it? You can't promise you'll answer it correctly. I planted a tree outside my house from a almond seed that I bought in Sainsbury's, and it's got very, very big. My next door, I want to take it down. Do I own it or does the council own it? It's not on. It's outside my house. Hello? Well, council land, I suppose, or maybe it's Kingfisher land. I'm not sure what land it is. It's no good asking the council because they say it's Kingfisher, and no good asking Kingfisher. My neighbour doesn't want me to touch it. My neighbour doesn't want me to touch it because the little birds sit in it, you see. And but it's too big and all the leaves.
Listen, I was worried about my comments on
it. I planted it, so it should be my tree, shouldn't it? Or not? I don't know.
I'm sure you're highly responsible for it. But as I say, I'd sue Sainsbury's for allowing it to grow. Right, we don't have a tree officer, so we can either, we have a potential tree officer. We can either agree to take it unless we've got all in one, and agree it, or if anybody's got questions, we'll have to defer it. En bloc, yes. Agreed. Okay. En bloc. Thank you. Thank you, members, very much. Yes, sir.
Just before you finish, Chair, I just wonder whether we might be able to send a note to Councillor Mitchell saying how pleased we've been with your discreet and efficient chairing of the meeting. Would that be possible?
You're very kind. I'm sure he'd love to receive that on holiday.
Particularly the discreet bit, if I may.
Thank you.